Good evening, and welcome to this meeting of the Boston School Committee. I'm Chairperson Jerry Robinson. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We currently do not have a quorum. Our official meeting will begin once a quorum is established. I will acknowledge the presence of a quorum before proceeding. Can I do the announcements about? Excuse me. Okay, all righty. I want to welcome everyone who is joining us tonight in person on Boston City TV and on Zoom. I'm going to ask everyone here in the chamber to please turn off the volume on your laptops or other devices so it does not interfere with the audio for tonight's meeting. Thank you for your cooperation. Tonight's meeting documents are posted on the committee's webpage, bostonpublicschools.org/school committee, under the December 18th meeting link. For those joining us in person, you can access the meeting documents by scanning the QR code that's posted by the doors. The meeting documents have been translated into all of the major BPS languages. Any translations that are not ready prior to the start of the meeting will be posted as soon as they are finalized. The meeting will be rebroadcast on Boston City TV and posted on the school committee's webpage and on YouTube. The recording will be available in all of the BPS languages. The committee is pleased to offer live simultaneous interpretation virtually in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cape Verdean, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, and American Sign Language. The Zoom interpretation feature has been activated. Zoom participants should click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen to select your language preference. And I'd like to remind everyone to speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. I now invite my fellow members and Superintendent Skipper to join me on the floor for the presentation of a citation to Louisa Sparrow, recipient of the 2025 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year. Mrs. Sparrow, or as her students affectionately call her, Miss S, is a special education teacher for 5th and 6th graders at the Perry School in South Boston. I had the pleasure of joining the ceremony where Miss S was honored by both the governor and the mayor. I was deeply moved by the introduction by her student and the many students cheering her on in the crowd. Miss S is deeply committed to inclusion and literacy, actively contributing to the school's inclusion planning team and founding an inclusive cooking club. The Massachusetts Teacher of the Year program is the highest honor for educators in the state, recognizing those who demonstrate exceptional dedication and make a lasting positive impact on their students and community. We are incredibly proud that Ms. Sparrow has been selected as the recipient of the state's Top Leader Educator Award. Next year, she will be a liaison to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESES, and serve as a representative for teachers all over Massachusetts. Just like the students, Ms. S, we will be cheering you on. Congratulations. So the citation reads, The Boston School Committee congratulations to the Barrow, teacher Oliver Hazard, recipient of the 2025 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year. As an Educator of the Year, Ms. Barrow exemplifies the hard work, commitment, and professionalism of educators district-wide who continually go above and beyond. Be it further known that the school committee and superintendent of schools extend their deepest appreciation to Ms. Barrow for her unwavering dedication to BPS students and families, and wish her continued success in all future endeavors. December 18th, 2024.
And I just like to say that it was, when we got to be able to see, Miss S with her class, and all of the students at the Perry, she said to them, just remember, I love you and I want the best for you. And you could feel from the students how much they care about you, and they felt that care. And I think, you make us proud today, not just at the Perry, but in BPS and all in Massachusetts. And so, Louisa will be now representing us as she goes out and she spreads her best practice and BPS's best practice throughout Massachusetts. So, congratulations. It's really, really an honor to have you as an educator here in BPS.
Great.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here today and very proud to be a Boston Public Schools teacher. This is my fifth district that I've taught in, my fourth state country that I've taught in, and I've really found a home that I'm very proud to teach in here. And I really appreciate all of your support, Superintendent Skipper. Actually, I don't know if you remember this, but you came to visit my classroom on one of my very first weeks back from maternity leave after having my second child. And I initially felt very anxious about the visit, just saying, oh no, I'm just back. But you really, you were just so warm and friendly in the visit. And I felt was very comforted that you were there and really excited to work in Boston. So I'm very proud to be there. Thank you so much. And I'm just so proud to work amongst so many wonderful educators in the district.
When they get busy, you're busy, man. Yeah, sorry, that's yours. You need that.
Before we move on, I'd also like to take a moment to congratulate Vice Chair Mr. Michael O'Neill on his reappointment to the Boston School Committee. Mr. O'Neill has been an unwavering leader. His dedication, vast experience, and insightful contributions have been greatly benefited our students. We are fortunate to have him continue in his role, and I look forward to our continued collaboration for the success of our students and schools. We're now going to move on to public comment.
Thank you, Chair. The public comment period is an opportunity for parents, caregivers, students, and other concerned parties to make brief presentations to the school committee on pertinent school issues. Questions on specific school matters are not answered this time, but are referred to the superintendent for a later response. Questions on specific policy matters are not answered this time, but may be the subject or later discussion by the committee. The meeting will feature 2 public comment periods, with the first comment period limited to 1 hour. Priority will be given to those testifying in person. Time permitting, the committee will then open it up for virtual testimony. After 1 hour, anyone who hasn't testified will have the opportunity to do so at the end of the meeting. We have 16 speakers this evening. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak, and I will remind you when you have 30 seconds remaining. If your remarks are longer than 3 minutes, please email your comments for distribution to the committee. The time that an interpreter uses for English interpretation will not be deducted from a speaker's allotted time. Speakers may not reassign their time to others. Please direct your comments to the chair and refrain from addressing individual school committee members or district staff. Please note the comments of any public speaker do not represent the Boston Public Schools or the Boston School Committee. Please state your name, affiliation, and what neighborhood you are from before you begin. We will begin this evening with our in-person speakers. Deidre Manning, John Mudd, Willow Yang, and Cynthia Lee. Deidre Manning.
Good evening, members of the school committee and superintendent. My name is Deirdre Manning. I am a resident of Dorchester, a single parent and sole financial supporter of 2 school-age children who are also public school students. I've spoken to you many times before, and I feel that not much progress has been made. I'm encouraged to see that the exam school policy is on the agenda today. However, I fear that there won't be any meaningful change to the policy that doesn't continue to exclude students who live in different areas of the city, including West Roxbury, parts of Dorchester, and students who go to the Elliott School, which is one of Boston Public Schools' own school. I understand that the policy might include tiers being compressed. My concern with that is even if you reduce the number of tiers, if you still have the higher tiers competing against many more applicants, particularly those who do not receive bonus points, those students are targeted for exclusion. I would like the school committee to understand that Boston Public Schools is meant to serve all members of the community. That includes people who live in West Roxbury, Dorchester, Charlestown, all corners of the city. Every single child who lives in the city should have a similar chance for admission. So by continuing to sort of go with a tier policy that has applicant admittance rates in below 50%, where others have close to 90 or 100%, that's just not acceptable. And I struggle to understand the disconnect between members of the public not being adequately served. I understand that the system in the past put students at a severe disadvantage. You've really just created another group of students to be excluded. I also want to touch briefly on testimony that I gave about 6 weeks ago, where there was incorrect information related to the so-called bonus point list. So I was correct. That information was incorrectly posted in November. But I want to point out to the school committee members that that information was available
30
from
seconds.
DESE in February. So February to November is plenty of time to look at the data and calculate the correct amounts. And you simply just can't be dropping this in November and not have it be accurate. And I will say that despite the fact that the one that I mentioned was corrected, there were other mistakes that were subsequently corrected, but that was not advertised. And the list wasn't even indicated that it was subsequently updated. It's just not right.
Thank you. Thank you. Your time is up. Next speaker is John Mudd.
Good evening. My name is John Mudd. I'm a resident of Cambridge and a longtime education advocate in Boston. Excuse me. For those of us who have been monitoring the diversity hiring issue for many years, the report you received at the last meeting was disappointing and discouraging. 2024 was a bad year for teacher diversity. The overall percentage of educators of color declined. BPS still does not meet the 50-year-old Garrity standard of 25% Black educators. BPS hired only 38 Black teachers in 2024. That is half the number hired 2 years ago. Last year, BPS also saw the largest exit of Black teachers and the largest net loss of Black teachers for all the years reported. 52 more Black teachers left the system than were hired into the district this year. The same is true for Latinos, where 15 more educators exited than were hired. This reality was nowhere highlighted in the report. Yet we are told in the hiring report that the percentage of teachers of color is stable, as though that might be reassuring. There was no sense of deep concern about the lack of progress on this issue, no sense of urgency or accountability. The report does celebrate one positive achievement of this year's hiring, which is the report that over 50% of educator hires have some self-reported language fluency. It is sadly ironic, however, that these same teachers will be assigned into classes where they are told they cannot use native language in instruction, and over 90% of the students are failing. Stop implementing inclusion for multilingual students. Develop bilingual programs where teachers can use their language skills in instruction. Publicizing new bilingual programs for the few score of students diverts attention from the reality that thousands are being dumped into English immersion classes. The lessons I learned from the report and the recommendations I would make are: the Garrity standard are woefully out of date. Update them. 2, add reports on teacher language diversity to the existing reports on race and ethnicity. 3, report the gaps in race and language numbers for each school. 4, require the district to develop a long-term teacher
30
diversity
seconds.
plan with goals, timetables, and outcomes that can be measured and provide the basis for accountability. 5, bring successful pipeline programs to scale. And 6, most important, convene a real working group task force to develop new strategies that can significantly increase the number and percentages of Black, Latino, Asian, and language-specific proficient teachers, including a collaboration with local colleges and universities.
Thank
What
you,
is
Mr. Mudd.
happening now is not working. Thank you.
Next speaker is Willow Yang.
Good evening. My name is Willow Yang, and I'm a resident of the Mission Hill. I'm currently working with the Office of Multilingual and Multicultural Education Department at Boston Public Schools. I'm here asking the school committee to advocate for me and other international colleagues' ability to continue work with BPS after May 2025. All of us came from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds and are passionate about contributing our knowledge and skills to better the education system here in Boston. Our current work authorization under F1 student visa is set to expire in the summer of 2025. However, all of us have a master's degree from Harvard that qualifies for OPT STEM extension, allowing us to work without work sponsorship for 2 more years if our employer, in this case, the City of Boston, is enrolled in the E-Verify program with the federal government. We believe that enrolling in E-Verify is an important step in ensuring that BPS retains a culturally and linguistically diverse representation of its workforce. According to the BPS strategic vision for 2020 to 2025, BPS students come from 139 countries, and almost 1 in 2 students speak a different language at home. At multiple points throughout the strategic report, BPS commits itself to, quote, hire and retain a workforce that reflects the racial, ethnic, and linguistic diversity of the students and families it serves, end quote. In addition, the report also indicates that it will, quote, address the structural barriers that impact staff and educators of color. For us, this is a structural barrier. The retention of international staff will ensure that students or teachers are supported continuously and consistently. As educators from international backgrounds, we're proud that we can bring in perspective that reflects the students and families of our BPS community. Retaining current staff will mean that resources can be aimed at existing programming rather than cost of hiring and additional training. However, we're faced with bureaucratic red taping when it comes to advocating for ourselves. BPS OHR said this is a responsibility of the City of Boston. When we approached the City of Boston, their response clearly acknowledged their understanding and awareness of the E-Verify program and the benefits for a few years. However, they could not give us an answer because
30
implementing it across would be difficult given Boston is a decentralized department. I want to highlight that this is not the first time this conversation has been raised in BPS. Their leaders who came before us spoke up and their voices were not heard. Today, we're asking the school committee to advocate, to be a part of our advocacy, pushing the City of Boston to prioritize enrollment in the E-Verify process before February 2025.
Next speaker is Cynthia Lee.
Dear School Committee, my name is Cynthia Lay, and I currently work with the Department of Behavioral Health Services here at Boston Public Schools. I'm here asking the school committee to advocate for me and other colleagues that come from international backgrounds to continue work with BPS after May of 2025 through the E-Verify program. My time at BPS has been marked by a diverse community that strives to provide safe, supportive, and culturally relevant educational experiences for all students and families. And I am fortunate to be able to serve BPS in the Department of Behavioral Health Services. Our district is at the forefront of school-based mental health services and school psychology, and we are recognized internationally for the work that we do. As a project manager for the department, I manage a $5 million competitive workforce development program and grant. This grant seeks to recruit, train, and retain high-quality BPS school-based mental health practitioners that reflect the racial, cultural, and linguistic diversity of our community, all of which contribute to the strategic priorities of Boston Public Schools. During my first 3 months in this department, I'm also proud to share that I was able to secure $100,000 of funding to expand our mental health resources and services, which will contribute to the high-quality care that our students deserve. Retaining current staff will mean that resources can be aimed at existing programming rather than the additional costs that go into hiring and training. In many of our departments, the disruption of losing staff have already been felt due to our not being enrolled in E-Verify. We are not the first to raise this concern at Boston Public Schools. I hope that you can feel the sense of urgency that I'm trying to convey, that losses are felt throughout the entire BPS community, whether it be in our departments facing unnecessary shortages, and more importantly, students who will not be able to fully benefit from the services and programs that BPS offers. If we work together to begin the process for E-Verify now, we can prevent losses in BPS and will pave the way for more high-quality professionals, practitioners, and educators to serve in Boston Public Schools.
Our next speakers are Myren Murillo, Wandel Tropman, Kyla Briggs, Barbara Fields, Willie Bodrick. Myren Murillo and Wandel Tropman will need participation. Mr. Bernal.
Good evening, everyone. For the better flow of communication, she would rather read the entire document, and I will provide a side translation into English as soon as she's done.
Buenas noches, miembro del comité escolar. Mi nombre es Mairene Morillo. Vivo en Dorchester y trabajo como paraprofesional en la escuela María Humana Academy. A lo largo de mi experiencia en un aula inclusiva, he sido testigo de los grandes desafíos que enfrentamos al intentar adaptar el currículo para satisfacer las diversas necesidades de los estudiantes. Cada niño tiene habilidades y fortalezas únicas y nuestra responsabilidad como educadores es garantizar que todos reciban el apoyo necesario para prosperar. En una aula inclusiva, los estudiantes enfrentan una variedad de desafíos, desde dificultades en el desarrollo del lenguaje, las habilidades motoras, la memoria, la atención, hasta aspectos socioemocionales. Algunos estudiantes multilingües requieren instrucción especializada para superar barreras lingüísticas y culturales, lo que aumenta aún más la complejidad de la tarea como para profesionales. Nuestro trabajo es fundamental para asegurar que cada estudiante reciba el apoyo necesario en esas áreas, ayudando a adaptar los materiales, brindar atención personalizada y facilitar la interacción social. Sin embargo, muchas veces esto implica un esfuerzo extra, ya que debemos manejar situaciones emocionales complejas, ajustar las estrategias de enseñanza a las necesidades específicas de cada niño. Es aquí donde se presenta una de las mayores preocupaciones, el bajo salario de los paraprofesionales, a pesar de las múltiples responsabilidades que asumimos, desde asistir en el aula hasta adaptarnos a las necesidades emocionales y educativas de los estudiantes. Nuestros salarios nos reflejan el nivel de compromiso y trabajo que requiere esta labor. Este bajo salario no solo afecta nuestra motivación, sino que también pone en riesgo la calidad del apoyo que podemos ofrecer a los estudiantes. Para lograr un impacto positivo y duradero en sus vidas, es crucial que se reconozca la importancia de nuestro trabajo a través de una compensación justa. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Now the translation is being provided into English, side translation. Good evening, members of the school committee. My name is Marine Murillo. I live in Dorchester and work as a paraprofessional at the Maria Humana Academy. Throughout my experience in an inclusive classroom, I have witnessed the significant challenges we face when attempting to adapt the curriculum to meet the diverse needs of our students. Every child has a unique ability and strengths, and our responsibility as educators is to ensure that all receive the support necessary to thrive. In an inclusive classroom, students face a variety of challenges, from difficulties in language development, motor skills, memory, attention, to social-emotional aspects. Some multilingual students require specialized instruction to overcome linguistic and cultural barriers, which further increases the complexity of the task. As paraprofessionals, our work is critical to ensure that each student receives the necessary support in these areas, helping to adapt materials, provide personalized attention, and facilitate social integration. This often requires extra effort as we must manage the complexity of emotional situations and adjust accordingly to teaching strategies to the specific needs of every child. This is where one of the biggest concerns arises, the low salaries of paraprofessionals. Despite the multiple responsibilities we take on, from assisting in the classroom to adapting to the emotional and educational needs of students, our salaries do not reflect the level of commitment and work that this job requires. This low salary not only affects our motivation, but also jeopardizes the quality of support we can offer our dear students. To achieve a positive and lasting impact in their lives, it is crucial that the importance of our work is recognized through fair compensation. As we always say, together we are stronger. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Wandel Tropman.
Likewise, Mr. Mondal will read the entire document. I will provide a side translation as soon as he's done into English.
Buenas noches, mi nombre es Wandel. Actualmente vivo en el área de Roxbury y recientemente me gradué de la escuela secundaria English High School. Adicionalmente, estoy representando a Sociedad Latina, que es una organización sin fines de lucro y de desarrollo juvenil, donde también formo parte de su personal y soy un ex alumno. El día de hoy estoy acá para comunicar algunas demandas sobre la educación acerca de la tecnología en las escuelas y cómo podemos nosotros como jóvenes aprovecharla de una mejor manera. Hace un año, el jefe de Servicio Federal de Salud Pública, el doctor Vivek Murthy, publicó un nuevo aviso sobre las redes sociales y la salud mental de los jóvenes. Aunque las redes sociales pueden ofrecer algunos beneficios, así también puede ofrecer puede ser perjudiciales para la salud mental y el bienestar de niños y adolescentes, ya que se ha previsto que el 95% de los jóvenes de entre 13 y 17 años afirma tener acceso a una plataforma de las redes sociales, y eso es casi constantemente. Nuestra demanda entonces como organización es que el dinero que se piensa utilizar para los fondos escolares del año 2025 se empeñe principalmente en añadir capacidad al sistema escolar por medio de poner nuevos talleres donde se les enseñe a los maestros acerca de cómo utilizar la tecnología y la inteligencia artificial. También estamos solicitando que BPS proporcione talleres o clases sobre ciudadanía digital responsable y uso responsable del teléfono en todas las escuelas públicas. Personalmente, también cuando fui estudiante, el sistema de Yonder fue algo un poquito complicado para mí, ya que me gustaba en mi tiempo libre ver mi teléfono. Pero descubrí que hablar con mis compañeros y tener esas conversaciones importantes pueden hacer que la vida mía y de los otros jóvenes pueda ser productiva también. Finalmente, Sociedad Latina está solicitando que BPS cree un comité que incluya a estudiantes, padres y tutores y otra vez a organizaciones externas que trabajan con jóvenes para asesorar sobre la política de utilizar dispositivos móviles en las escuelas públicas. Y también debemos mencionar que es importante que BPS implemente las clases de preparación
30 segundos.
para la inteligencia artificial y clases de cómo ser un consumidor digital crítico. Es necesario tomar acción inmediata para que no se pierdan estos beneficios que ayudarán a los jóvenes a tener un futuro mejor. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Side translation is provided into English right now. Good afternoon. My name is Wandel. I live in Roxbury, and recently I graduated from the English High School. Additionally, I am representing Sociedad Latina, which is a nonprofit organization, youth development organization, where I'm currently a staff member and alumni of their program. Today, I'm here to communicate several demands about tech education in schools and how we as young people can take better advantage of it. An interesting statistic here, the Surgeon General warning. A year ago, the Surgeon General of the United States, Mr. Vivek Murthy, issued a new warning about social media and youth mental health. While social media may offer some benefits, it can also be detrimental to the mental health and well-being of children and adolescents, with as many as 95% of 13 to 17-year-olds reporting using social media platform, and more than 1/3 reporting using social media almost constantly. Here's the demand: funding for digital citizenship classes and artificial intelligence classes plus BPF when appropriate. BPS personnel. Our demand as an organization is that the funding from the 2025 school year be spent primarily on adding capacity to the school system in regards to that big problem. By implementing professional development workshops where teachers are taught about how to use technology and artificial intelligence. Also, we are requesting that BPS provides workshops or classes on responsible digital citizenship and responsible phone use in all schools. My personal story, one of those personal experience with phone policy at the English high school. Personally, when I was a student, the implementation of the Yonder Postures program was very stressful at first. But later, I realized that having conversations instead of being on my phone could be very productive. This can also help other young people to develop their future. And my last demand. Finally, Sociedad Latina is requesting that BPS creates a committee that includes students, parents, guardians, and outside organizations that work with youth to advise regarding the policy of using mobile devices in public schools. It is important that BPS implements artificial intelligence readiness for all classes and classes that teach how critical it is to be a digital consumer. Finally, we need to do an audit to find out that BPS schools are what are currently doing the BPS schools to prepare the students with this necessary ability and competence. It is necessary to take immediate action so that these benefits will be helping the youth and the young people to have a better life, and those lives are not lost. Thank you very much for your attention to this special request, and have a good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Kayla Briggs. Kayla Briggs. Then Barbara Field.
Just gonna give you the statement.
Good evening, school committee members and superintendent. Glasses on so I can see. My name is Barbara Fields, and I'm representing the Black Educators Alliance of Massachusetts. I speak to you this evening with a sense of urgency and deep concern regarding a troubling and largely overlooked crisis within Boston Public Schools, the alarming decline in the hiring and retention of Black educators. This issue, if left unaddressed, will undermine any progress made in diversifying our educator workforce with far-reaching implications for our students. The recent presentations to the school committee, such as the Equity Garrity Educators Report, which highlighted recruitment and retention trends for educators of color, have inadvertently masked the severity of the problem. The report combining hiring and retention data for both Black teachers and counselors, leading to an unclear picture of the situation. In doing so, it obscured the specific challenges faced by Black educators in BPS, making it difficult to grasp the full scope of the crisis and formulate appropriate interventions. Guidance counselors are not considered teachers in the Garrity Court report. It currently reports Black teachers and guidance counselors in the report at 22.6%, down from the 23.1% in 2023. We asked the school committee to request the number and percentages of Black teachers separate from guidance counselors in an updated report so that the actual percentage of Black teachers employed in the BPS is known. And I bet after receiving that report, the last meeting, none of you can tell me exactly how many Black teachers there are in BPS. You can tell me how many Black teachers and guidance counselors are in BPS. The data presented in the report also shows that the retention of Black administrators dropped sharply from 91.7% in 2021 to 75.6% in 2023. This decline coincides with a period of leadership turnover and reports of disproportionate administrative leaves
30 seconds.
affecting Black leaders of color in BPS. This allegation of discriminatory targeting has not been adequately addressed to date by BPS. The retention of Black teachers fell from 83.3 in 21 to 81.2% in 23. There are several key questions that remain unanswered and must be addressed to fully understand the causes of Black educator attrition. And we're going to give you a memo. So for
Thank
sake of
you.
time, I want
Time is
to,
up.
okay, I will skip all of those. But the other thing that I would like you to pay attention to
Thank you, Ms.
is,
Field.
I'm going, is the changes that are reported in that. And those are changes that I thought we were already doing. So I'm really surprised that there is changes for next year.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you
Field.
for the extra time. Appreciate it.
Next speaker is Willie Broderick.
Good evening, Superintendent Skipper, to Chair Robinson and Vice Chair O'Neill, and to the entire Boston Public Schools School Committee. My name is Reverend Willie Broderick II, and I serve as president of the Boston Network for Black Student Achievement. And as an organization, we are committed and dedicated to advancing equity for all students, but especially Black students, families, and educators. And we believe in addressing systemic issues with an urgency, clarity, and compassion. Tonight, I want to bring to your attention a pressing matter within the BPS, the alarming decline of hiring and retention of Black educators. This issue goes beyond personnel. It is a structural challenge that we have been facing and that directly impacts the quality of education and the equity within all of our schools. Without immediate action, we risk erasing any modicum of progress that was made by the Recruitment, Cultivation, and Diversity Office during 2020 to 2022. As already been stated earlier by Beam, the Garrity Order reports presented, the Boston School Committee attempted to shed light on the Garrity Educators Report and the diversity that is present here in the school committee, in our school system, but it failed to provide enough transparency to tackle this issue. By combining the teachers and guidance counselors, it really does blur the critical distinctions as well as mask many of the challenges that are faced by many of our Black educators. It is important to note that under Garrity that the guidance counselors are not classified as teachers, and thus highlighting that we as a city have still yet to achieve that Garrity standard. Despite many advocates bringing this to our attention, we think that it is important that we address this issue and make sure that we move forward with this issue corrected. Much of the current data has already been stated, and you know it very well, as we have seen, even with the combining of our guidance counselors and our educators, we have seen this drop from both 2022 and 2023. And without separating these categories, we need to see true numbers that really reflect what's happening. And we're asking that the school committee does a report, or at least ask for an updated disaggregated data report that will make this clear so that we can address this matter with urgency. We also know about the Black administrator retention that dropped sharply from 91% to 75%, and even the teacher retention that decreased from 88.3% in 2021 to 81.2%. And so we want to make sure that we're doing the work to acknowledge this, and to even break even, BPS would have to hire at least 52 more Black educators, which has been a daunting task in many ways. And so we want to continue to ask these questions. What percentage of Black educators hold leadership positions of the 118 school leaders? What Black educators are leaving the district, and why are these Black educators leading at the rate that they're leaving, particularly in relation to their white counterparts? And then what proportion of Black teachers exits are from classroom teaching as versus the guidance counselor? I will report a memo as well so that you have all this information. There's more to be reported, but we want to make sure that we put this issue at the highest of your priority, because we do believe we can tackle this issue together. Thank you very much.
We will now transition to the Zoom testimonies. Our next speakers are Ian Chan, Mike Heichman, Kevin Jones, Nicole O'Neill, Michelle Kane, and Emily Chapman. Ian Chan. Ian Chan, please turn on your camera. And unmute yourself.
Hello, my name is Ian Chan. I live in Brighton, Massachusetts, and I go to the Josiah Quincy Elementary School. I'd like to share some thoughts about the Zoom bus app, which plays a critical role in helping our drivers navigate their routes. While the route has its merits, I've noticed that it can sometimes lead drivers down less efficient paths, and that's a concern we should address. Recently, I experienced this firsthand during a bus ride. Our driver faithfully followed the app's directions, but unfortunately, we ended up on a slower route, causing us to arrive home at a frustrating 10 minutes late at 5:34 p.m. This delay is not just a minor inconvenience. It can affect our entire evening. As a result, we are constantly getting home late, and it seems that the driver is solidly dependent on the GPS. What if the Zoom app allowed more input from the students it serves? Incorporating feedback and insights from us could lead to smarter, faster routes and a much smoother experience. While some thoughtful enhancements, I truly believe the Zoom app could transform the journey for both the drivers and the students they transport. Thank you for considering this important issue. I am excited about the potential for improvement. It is essential to us students because we can help develop better routes for the drivers than what the machines can do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mike Eichmann.
Intern. I think an internship in transportation is in order.
You should ask all the kids.
Mike Eichmann.
Mike Eichmann, Dorchester, Beja. That was disturbing report about the lack of equity and racism in hiring and retention. Now for my testimony. This could happen here. Thank you, BTU members, for your advocacy for improvements in our school system. Harmful policies are often chosen because they are cheaper than providing additional funds for successful policies. The BPS chooses inclusion done cheaply and poorly instead of inclusion done right. The department also chooses other policies done cheaply and poorly. Negotiations with the BTU and their common good proposals are providing the system with many opportunities to improve teaching and learning. Embracing these opportunities should happen here. Recently, 3 suburban communities to our north went out on strike for over 10 days. These unions stood up for their members and advocated for improvements in teaching and learning conditions. The media always reminded the public that these actions to withhold their labor were illegal, and judges levied heavy fines. I applaud the 3 unions for courageously defying an unjust law and the strong support that all of them received from their communities. This could happen here. Teaching conditions in our schools are substantially inferior to our neighboring striking communities. Thus, the BTU has a far greater responsibility to fight for our children. The ineffective management of the BPS is harmful to many of our children. This is permissible and legal. Withholding your labor in order to pressure the system to be more effective, humane, and pro-children would be obedience to a higher authority. When I was a teacher in Chelsea, we went out on strike twice. It was the right thing to do for ourselves and a gift of a positive and powerful teaching moment for our children and community. Superintendent Skipper and BSC members, I urge you to do the right thing and embrace this opportunity to be just to our educators and improve teaching and learning conditions. If not, I urge the community to support the BTU and for the union to shut this system down. This should happen here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eichmann. Next speaker is Haven Jones.
Good evening. My name is Haven Jones, and I am a Jamaica Plain resident and a school social worker at Boston Latin Academy. I'm here to speak about the BTU's contract demands for fair wages for paraprofessionals. Throughout my time as a social worker in BPS, I've been fortunate to collaborate with a number of skilled and caring paraprofessionals to support students with disabilities on my IEP counseling caseload. These colleagues of mine often have the most intimate knowledge of the students and their needs out of all the educators within our buildings because they are with the students they serve virtually every minute of the day. Think about that for a moment. Other than a brief break for lunch, our paraprofessionals are with our students who have the highest needs from the moment they step off of the school bus in the morning to the time they board the bus to go home at dismissal. The paraprofessionals are there to help break down academic content when lessons are moving too fast, to assist students in regaining control when they are emotionally or behaviorally dysregulated, to help students with mobility and sensory challenges navigate around our many non-ADA compliant buildings, and so much more. In short, paraprofessionals make school possible for so many of our students who otherwise would not be able to get through the day on their own. Yet, many paraprofessionals in BPS make less than 30% of the area median income for the city of Boston, which qualifies them as extremely low income. This is, in a word, insulting. Our paraprofessionals deserve to be paid a wage that fairly compensates them for the dedication that they show to some of our most high-need students day in and day out. They deserve to be able to afford in the city of Boston without having to take on additional jobs to make ends meet. In short, they deserve better. Part of my ethical responsibility as a social worker is to uplift the marginalized. BPS has financially marginalized our paraprofessionals for far too long. We need a contract that recognizes and values our paraprofessionals for the contributions they make to our schools. Members of the Boston School Committee, I urge you to meet the BTU's demand for fair wages for paraprofessionals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Nicole O'Neill.
Hi, good evening. My name is Nicole O'Neill, and I am the proud parent of 2 students at the Linden Pilot School in West Roxbury. Last week, a current family attempted to transfer their 3rd grade twins into the Linden such that all of the kids would be able to attend the same school. However, they were turned away by central office, who stated there was no space for them and they had to choose to enroll at a separate school. However, this information was not true. The current 3rd grade cohort contained 50 students and could easily accommodate 10 more. Yet the district placed a block on enrollment back in September. This is just one of many families who have been turned away this fall from enrolling into our school. Our community has spent several hours at school preview days this fall trying to recruit new families to the Linden and BPS without knowledge of this detrimental decision made by central office. I stand here as a public school advocate and ask, why would the district expressly prohibit one of its high quality schools with seemingly no cause or justification from growing in numbers at a time when enrollment is so desperately needed across the district? How will turning away interested families help to improve the reputation and financial health of BPS? The decision to close individual classrooms across BPS is not a sufficient long-term fix, but rather a Band-Aid placed over a bullet hole. We need the district to work with schools to create a plan with a more proactive approach to attract more families to the district, not make irrational decisions that drive families away to the suburbs. We ask, or private schools, I should say. We ask that the enrollment holds placed on our school be removed such that our enrollment numbers accurately reflect the interest in our school and in our community. Additionally, we ask that our current 3rd grade cohort remain 3 classes next year to support inclusion and differentiation of instruction. And we ask the school committee and superintendent to review the process of blocking enrollment at schools and classrooms without just cause to ensure that it is not inadvertently prohibiting the growth and success of the Boston Public Schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Michelle Kane.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Kane, and I'm a biology teacher at the Margaret and Muniz Academy in Jamaica Plain. Brushing your teeth, cooking eggs, writing a letter. These are all skills and abilities that, I would hazard to guess, you have all mastered, more or less anyways. If asked to demonstrate knowledge of any of these skills, I would bet you would ace that test. You would likely be able to speak knowledgeably about how to carry out each one and what key ideas are important to consider when doing so. If a job required competency in these tasks, you'd surely be hired and you'd be confident you could do the job well, barring any unforeseen circumstances. Now, if I asked you to cook scrambled eggs, brush your teeth, and write a letter all within the same 5 minutes, that might pose a bit of a problem. Of course, you can do each of these things on their own. Of course, you know what each should look like when done well, but to do them all at the same time is a different thing altogether. Maybe you just bite on the toothbrush, write a letter with one hand on the counter while attempting to stir the eggs. Maybe it all gets done. Your breath is probably not the freshest, your letter not so thoughtful and with less than stellar penmanship, and the eggs are edible, sure, but not really what you wanted. Knowing how and what it looks like when these things are done well and being confident in your abilities to accomplish them were not enough. You needed more time. You needed more hands. You needed some help. If someone came to evaluate your teeth brushing, egg scrambling, and letter writing, you'd probably be concerned. You might feel worried or frustrated. This isn't a fair test after all. You might be thinking, but of course I can brush my teeth. Of course I can write a letter. Of course I can make better eggs than this. But what could you have done differently in that situation? You were given a ludicrous test that assumed competency for each individual task was sufficient for doing them all simultaneously. Of course, I'm not actually speaking of dry scrambled eggs and poorly brushed teeth. I'm speaking of children needing an education. I'm speaking of teachers put in impossible positions. I'm speaking of district leadership looking at my colleagues and I in the face, telling us that we should be able to brush our teeth, cook scrambled eggs, and write letters all at the same time because we have proven that we have knowledge of these things separately. I'm sure I don't need to belabor my point, but for the sake of clarity, I will speak for a moment without metaphor. Demanding and expecting educators to teach the tremendously diverse student body of Boston under multiple licenses instead of having multiple adults each with those qualifications is a perversion of the spirit of inclusion classrooms. I find it profoundly troubling that district leadership maintains it's a reasonable ask that one adult address the needs of an immensely complex student population simply because that person has knowledge of what needs to be done. Teaching is not a purely intellectual exercise. It's an emotional and physically demanding role as well. Students deserve and need classrooms with enough
Seconds.
to learn effectively. That means counting the educators in the room, not tallying up licenses. Asking teachers to serve a group of students that necessitates more than one license is like asking me to brush my teeth, cook eggs, and write letters all at the same time, and expecting those things to be done at an exceptional level. I urge you to put yourself in the shoes of those you oversee. Please bring reason, logic, understanding, curiosity, and good faith into these discussions, and please make decisions that are worthy of the students of Boston. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Our last speaker is Emily Chapman.
Good evening. My name is Emily Chapman, and I am the proud. Let's make sure we can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I'm sorry. I thought my phone muted myself again. Good evening. My name is Emily Chapman, and I am the proud parent of 2 students at the Linden Pilot School in West Roxbury. Last week, we were informed that the district is planning to reduce our current grade cohort 3 classrooms to next year, which resulted in the dismissal of 1 teacher. However, the third cohort has 48 students and the second grade cohort has 58 students. These numbers are in direct conflict with the current BTU contract, which states there can only be 23 students max per classroom. Therefore, the district would need to see an enrollment of 46 or less in each cohort to support such a decision. Further, the effects of moving from a 3-strand to a 2-strand school will have major implications on the ability of teachers to differentiate instruction and provide the most effective inclusion practices. Last year, our teachers provided substantial evidence to the governance board on how they differentiate instruction across the 3 teachers in each grade to provide inclusion and assistance for students working below, at, and above grade level, resulting in gains in test scores and learning retention. With fewer teachers and subsequently fewer resources, how will differentiated instruction look for students next year if these cohorts are reduced from 3 classes to 2? How will inclusion work with fewer teachers and more students per classroom? What if our cohort's current enrollment does not go down to 46 students as is required to reduce a classroom, and our schools have already let go of one amazing teacher? Teachers who already know the students and families and who have spent hours and years perfecting their craft alongside their colleagues. What happens then? The decision to close individual, high-quality classrooms across BPS and at the Linden is not a sufficient long-term fix, but rather a knee-jerk reaction to a budgetary deficit. The much larger issue is that BPS needs to create a long-term facilities plan to account for significantly under-enrolled schools in large buildings that have high operating costs in staffing, heating, electricity, water, etc. We ask that the enrollment holds placed on our school be
30
removed
seconds.
such that our enrollment numbers accurately reflect the interest of the Linden. We ask that our current 3rd grade class remain 3 classes next year and 4th grade to support inclusion and differentiation. We ask the school committee and superintendent to consider how reducing classrooms will affect the overall learning opportunities for our students, how it will affect the resources for our staff in the coming years, and how BPS plans to communicate large changes like this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, that concludes public testimony.
Thank you. We now have a quorum and the official meeting can begin. We will begin with the approval of minutes. I will now entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the December 4th, 2024 school committee. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Is there any objection to approving the motion by unanimous consent? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. We'll now move on to the superintendent's report. I present to you our superintendent, Mary Skipper.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to everyone that is in the chamber this evening and on virtual. So it's great to be here for the last school committee of 2024. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the recent reappointment of Vice Chair Michael O'Neill to the school committee by our mayor. Mr. O'Neill is certainly a respected leader who has served the students and families of Boston as a member of the school committee for 16 years. I've had the good fortune of knowing Vice Chair O'Neill for many years, beyond that as a school leader, an educator here in BPS, and I always appreciate his thoughtful and insightful comments, his knowledge, his deep knowledge of the schools. You've been in so many of them, visited so many of them, and it's just his deep love for the students and the staff. I am extremely happy to welcome you back in the reappointment. You have always been a steadfast advocate for our schools and our students, and I'm really looking forward to the work ahead in the years. So congratulations. So in terms of our showcase of schools and registration, we're gearing up for school registration time for the 25-26 school year. We recently held our annual BPS Showcase of Schools here at the Bowling Building last Saturday on December 14th. The showcase provided families and students the opportunity to visit all of their school options in one event where they could meet their school leaders, they could ask questions, they could meet staff who were on hand, and really find out what makes each school unique. We had record more than 420 families attend this year's showcase, and we had 105 of the BPS schools represented, along with many other additional community resource tables. Families received a list of their home-based schools, and they were able to visit those school tables and get answers to their specific questions. As usual, I was just really impressed with the effort that each school made to make families feel welcome while highlighting what's special about their particular learning community. I want to acknowledge the work of Welcome Services, particularly Senior Director Sonia Gomez Benray and her team, our school leaders, all of the volunteers who made the event a success, Dr. Tavares. Our BPS schools are currently holding information sessions until January where prospective families can tour the school facilities, they can see student work, they can meet school leaders and staff, and they can get a chance to ask questions about the various programs. So, schools try to offer a combination of virtual and in-person as a way to ensure that they meet the needs of all families. Families and students can also go to www.bostonpublicschools.com/great starts to learn more about each school and access the school choice list, which has been updated with the most recent school quality framework tiers. Priority registration begins on Monday, January 6th for students entering K0, K1, K2, and grades 6, 7, and 9. And for additional dates and times for those sessions, important BPS registration information and deadlines, please visit www.bostonpublicschools.org/enroll. Last week, the Massachusetts Schools Building Authority Board of Directors, or what we call MSBA, voted to move the district's application for the Ruth Batson Academy forward in the next step of the core program to support a major renovation of the school's facilities. The invitation from MSBA into the eligibility period means that over the next year, the district will work with Ruth Batson Academy leadership and the MSBA to lay the groundwork for a large capital project supported by state funding, delivering on a longstanding commitment to the Ruth Batson community. I want to share my gratitude to the Ruth Batson teachers and families, and leader, who've all advocated for this project for many years. And I also know Chair Robinson and Vice Chair O'Neill have as well, making visits to the school itself. You've really continually pushed us to honor our commitment, and I'm very, very happy for the Ruth Batson community. This morning, I joined the Curley K-8 school in Jamaica Plain for the Unified Champion School Celebration and banner unveiling. You might remember that earlier in the school year, the Curley K-8 and the Mattahunt Elementary School received national banner recognition from the Special Olympics North America for meeting national standards of excellence in the areas of inclusion, advocacy, and respect during school year 23 to 24. Both school communities were honored for creating a social climate where everyone feels included and respected. They represent 2 of 19 schools named in Massachusetts, and they are among 202 recognized nationwide for this status. Through unified soccer and basketball teams, unified arts programming, and a unified student government, the entire Curley school community demonstrates the power of inclusivity by creating spaces where students of all abilities can come together, thrive, and support one another, and maybe most importantly, have fun. We were joined by City Councilor Ben Weber, City of Boston Disability Commissioner Kristen McCosh, Special Olympics Massachusetts Vice President Patty Doherty, and a special guest was a Special Olympian athlete Lumine Montesol. Lumine, one of the highlights of the day was that Lumine has won 3 gold medals. Lumine is also a graduate of Cash. And when she held up the 2 gold medals and a silver medal, the kids' eyes all got really big because she was sharing that she's a runner. And she said, "I'm like Flash." And so the kids were just so enthralled with her. It was a very sweet moment, but it also was just the power of what's possible. And finally, I just want to give a special thanks to leader Katie Grassa, her whole team for putting on the event. There were lots of just balloons, music, celebration. We had a 3rd grader who actually performed on the organ, and it was just wonderful to see the students coming together and really rallying around each other. So congratulations both to the Curley and to the Mattahunt. BPS held its football all-star game earlier this month at English High School, where team Randolph Abraham, who's the athletic director at Brighton High, prevailed over team Raul Brown, who's the head coach of Tech Boston Academy, with a game final score of 12-6. And you might also remember that Coach Brown last fall was named the New England Patriots Coach of the Week. So congratulations to both teams, and in particular to Brighton High in prevailing. Schools and students around the district are celebrating the season with special events and performances. A highlight of the 83rd annual Boston Common Christmas tree lighting on December 5th was a beautiful, uplifting performance by members of the Boston Arts Academy Blended Roots Ensemble. And on Friday, December 13th, last Friday, the BPS Central Office was treated, as we are each year, to festive performances by more than 600 talented students from 16 dance and music ensembles. I want to acknowledge the work of BPS Executive Director for the Arts, Tony Beatrice, who continues to shine a light on the incredible talent in the district and celebrate the creative spirit of all of our students. Truly fills our halls with just joy. Last week, the Shaw Taylor Elementary School in Dorchester hosted a successful coat drive for their incredible students in partnership with the We Love You Foundation. Shaw Taylor students receive coats, gloves, hats, and scarves as we prepare for the colder temperatures. And we'll actually be sending a notice home to all parents so that when we come back from the break, everybody remembers we're back into the winter season. And so we want to make sure students have what they need. Congratulations to the Bradley Elementary School for being named a 2024 National ESEA Distinguished School in the category of Exceptional Student Achievement earlier this month by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, or DESE. Each year, DESE nominates just 2 schools across the Commonwealth for this national recognition. I'm so proud of the entire Bradley Elementary School team for this well-deserved honor. School leader Claire Carney attributes the Bradley success to their commitment to implementing high-impact instructional strategies, a culture of staff collaboration aimed at enhancing student learning outcomes, and a welcoming environment that values parental input and ensures clear, consistent communication between schools and families. I also want to share that Maya Smith, who's the Associate Head of School at Fenway High School, has been named the 2025 Assistant Principal of the Year by the Massachusetts School Administrators Association. Ms. Smith has 21 years of experience in education in a variety of leadership roles, and she's served in her current role for the past 3 years. She's committed to improving educational outcomes for all students by ensuring they receive rigorous daily instruction and by breaking down barriers for the most marginalized communities. Congratulations to Ms. Smith. As we end 2024, I'd like to note that Ms. Smith, Ms. Sparrow, the Bradley, and the Curley schools and the Mattahunt join an impressive list of BPS educators and staff who were recognized this year for their outstanding contributions to district success. That list also includes 2024 BPS School Counselor of the Year, Sohaili Santos from the Curley K-8 school, the entire team at the Mattahunt, who are the Investors School on the Move Prize winner, and the O'Donnell Elementary School community, which was recognized by Governor Maura Healey and DESE for successfully reducing chronic absenteeism. These awards and recognitions are a reflection of the talent, commitment, and dedication that make up our BPS. I want to thank our teachers, administrators, and staff for their hard work every day, and we really look forward to a banner year in 2025. Before I close my report, we'd like to pause to mark a very special occasion. Chair Robinson's 10th anniversary as a member of the Boston School Committee. Chair Robinson was appointed to the school committee on November 19th, 2014, serving as chair for the past 3 years. An expert in early childhood education, Chair Robinson brings decades of experience to this role as an educator and as the longtime vice president of early childhood initiatives at the Boston Children's Museum. Chair Robinson was instrumental in helping to guide the district out of the COVID-19 pandemic and through a period of enormous change in our city by providing steady leadership and always centering the needs of the district's students. And that's what she does every day. This body, this district, and this city are better because of your leadership, Chair. Congratulations on making this milestone. And we have, I know that Vice Chair O'Neill is going to say a few words, and we have a little presentation. Drum roll, Lena.
That was a total surprise. She didn't even got her.
So, Madam Chair, on behalf of your fellow members, we want to congratulate you on the 10th year anniversary, or as I like to say, a good start. What the superintendent did not mention is you're also a graduate of the district, something you have never forgotten. And you and I have always shared that, being graduate of the district as well. And um, as the superintendent said, you're a longtime vice president of the Children's Museum, a very passionate advocate. And then several years ago, you retired and thought you were going to enjoy retirement. And now you're working harder than you probably did when you were at the Children's Museum. And I know you work very hard at the Children's Museum, because what a lot of the members of the public don't realize is what you see up here is just a small part of the role of being chair of the school committee in particular, as well as being a member overall. But the chair is very frequently out visiting schools. She has sat in I believe, every single BTU negotiating session, or most of them, I should say, and frequently updates the members on the progress there. She has joined many other negotiating sessions as well. She meets with community folks all the time. She meets with members one-on-one, usually weekly. I join her in meetings with the chair and other folks on a very regular basis. So this is a very small part of what is an extraordinarily full-time commitment for our chair, on behalf of all of us. And she works very hard to bring us together, to hear viewpoints, to make sure it is incorporated into policy recommendations, and to always push the district forward, and is an incredibly fierce advocate, most particularly for the students that we are serving every single day. She brings that commitment to every single conversation. And I know our fellow members and our one-on-one meetings with her, and the superintendent can certainly attest to, there are times when we're in small meetings and Chair Robinson pounds the table because she wants to make sure that our students are heard and represented. And so, having served in the role myself, I often tell the chair that there is nobody happier in the city of Boston that Jerry Robinson is the chair of the school committee than I am. And so you do an extraordinary job leading us, and we thank you for your commitment and your passion to all of us, to the staff, to the district, to the parents, to the community advocates, and most of all, to the students that we serve. Thank you, Chair Robinson.
Thank you.
Oh, a picture up front? Yes.
Yes.
We all go?
The photo.
Gary?
Yeah.
Picture day, just come down here, yeah. Yep, so I guess. Mary, come right here. Yep, chair. Right, Mary's side, whichever side you prefer. Everyone, come close. Yeah, that's a little bit better, yeah, and just come closer, yep. Right, smile. Don't close your eyes and. Great, thank you.
It's great.
It's too much, right?
So she could know her.
After
Mhm.
everyone's thoughts.
Well, thank you, Superintendent. I will now open it up for questions and discussion from the committee. I'd like to remind my colleagues about our agreed upon norm. We each have 5 minutes, 1 to 2 questions. Please make sure your questions are on topic related to the items in the superintendent's report. Other topics not related to the superintendent's report can be raised during new business later in the meeting. I'd also like to remind VPS staff to be brief in your responses, and please speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. Thank you.
I have a question.
No main questions. Maybe just a reminder for folks as to when they will expect to hear things around like school choice and things like that coming up in the new semester. Right. So we have all of this going on right now. Having just done the showcase, the information's all on our website. And it really starts that January 6th when we come back. That's the priority one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a couple of quick points. Superintendent, thank you for sharing that the MSBA voted to move the Ruth Batson Academy. I believe, what step was it that they?
Right. So the next step would be for us to put forward a design.
Yeah, this was the move to feasibility, right? So my suggestion would be it would be helpful, maybe we put it on our website under facilities or something to kind of explain to people what the various steps are of the MSBA process and what the time frame is for each. We certainly know it very well by a number of buildings that have been built recently, such as Josiah Quincy, Arts Academy, et cetera, Dearborn, that were all part of MSBA. And it would be helpful for people's expectations. I know we're working on it as well for I think Shaw Taylor was a step ahead. Now Ruth Batson is emptying. So it's about a 4 or 5 step process. And I think it'd be helpful to have people understand both what the process is and what the expected time frame is usually in each. I'm thrilled, and I know the chair is as well, about Ruth Batson. We have been pushing for that commitment to be honored for a while, so I'm glad it is. Second, that arts holiday celebration, the chair and I were at, and it was really special. It was so great to see particularly our, elementary and our high school students. Variety of arts represented, everything from music to interpretive dance, a variety of cultures represented and cultural celebrations. And it was great to see the interaction between the schools. But the chair and I was speaking to a number of the students, and we complimented them on one jazz version of a song, and they told us that there were in fact 10 different genres represented. It was gospel, and it was this, and it was that, and they were teaching us. And to see the power of the arts education now in our schools and the investment that this committee has pushed coming through. So we're now seeing it particularly in our early grades. So congratulations to Tony Beatrice and the rest of the team that have worked on it, because it was very, very powerful. And I just have to say, Superintendent, and the chair knows this, last Friday night, I attended an incredible event, and it was the faculty and staff of the Carter School getting a chance to tour the new Carter School that is under construction for the first time. They get to see where their classrooms are going to be and where their arts rooms and where their therapy rooms were. And it was incredibly moving to be there. There were a lot of tears, happy tears. One teacher in particular, as we all climbed to the second floor, excitedly told each of his colleagues every time they stepped through the door, this is your first time stepping on the second floor of the Carter School, because the existing building didn't have one. And one person who said, I was going to retire and now I can't because I want to teach our students in this new environment. So I have here to share with my colleagues drawings they all received of what the building is going to look like when it will be done the end of this year. And it's just another example of we hear so much that we need to be doing buildings, but between the Dearborn, Boston Arts Academy, Josiah Quincy Upper, now this one, Shaw Taylor, Ruth Batson, we have a lot underway right now, and particularly this is for our most vulnerable students, and it was a very special evening, and I thank Principal Mark O'Connell of the Carter School, Mark O'Connor, for the work that he and his team are doing, and this is going to be a game changer for our most vulnerable and most disabled students. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Actually, that actually reminds me, I think something that I'm wondering what we're doing as far as, at least in the past year and even moving forward, we're going to be having school mergers. I mean, this is something that we're anticipating. But because you had mentioned the Shaw Taylor, it sort of brought up, what are we doing to stay with this community, to actually continue monitoring how these communities have merged and actually how they're thriving now, or if they are thriving at all. I think that would also be something for other school communities to look at, to see like what the process is and how we're
continuing to stay with these families and with these communities after the merger has happened.
No, it's a great point, Dr. Hawkins. And I think that when we are doing our presentations in January, we can also share, how we're partnering schools and school leaders as they go through the variety of whether it's a merger, a closure, or grade reconfiguration. But I think those that have gone through it first have so much to teach both us and the other communities. It's a great point.
I just want to say I was so pleased coming on Saturday morning for the showcase. It was great. There was so much enthusiasm. And it was really provided me with an opportunity to talk directly to a number of school leaders. And I did talk to folks from the two schools that are merging, Shaw Taylor and the Sumner School, to hear about how they're going. And I think they need to hear from us. Is one of the requests was that, there are still meetings that are going on. It would be great for members of the school committee to go out and show their support. We know things are going to be difficult. They need some reassurances from us about that. Things will not be forgotten. The things that they're concerned about are real, and that we want to hear them in real time and not have people waiting on those things and worrying about them. So in the new year, we will be probably getting some invitations. I've explained to people they need to invite us to things. So many things are going on. Half the time we don't know every single thing, but if there's something that's going on out of school, we would welcome getting those invitations. So hopefully in the new year, we will be hearing more. Right, I will now entertain a motion to receive the superintendent's report. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Is there any objection to approving the motion by unanimous consent? Hearing none, the superintendent's report is approved. Our first action item this evening is the grants for approval totaling $4,138,421. Now I'd like to turn it over to the superintendent for any final comments.
Wonderful. So tonight's grants package includes 4 grants totaling $4.13 million. The largest of these is a 3-year continuing project provide grant totaling more than $2.23 million to improve access to mental health staff across the district. Project Provide is a partnership between BPS, UMass Boston, and BU to increase the number of diverse, highly qualified mental health staff that work in the BPS, while also improving the technical and supervisory skills of the current mental health workforce. We also seek your approval of the new More EV Trucks grant for nearly $1.6 million, which will serve students district-wide in school year 2025. This grant is a rebate for the purchase of 19 electric school buses. It will pay for additional buses and/or the continuation of the BPS bus fleet. This grant will help BPS and the city further our fleet electrification goals. Tonight, you are also asked to approve 2 additional grants, an Acceleration Academies grant totaling $240,000, which will serve a total of 600 students in school year 2025, and a grant for $100,000 supporting students' social emotional learning and behavioral and mental health to help 5,000 students. I see that CFO Bloom is squarely seated at the table, so if there's any questions, we're happy to entertain them.
Right, if there are no questions, I'll now entertain a motion to approve the grants as presented. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Is there any discussion or objection to the motion?
No.
Is there any objection to approving the motion by unanimous consent? Hearing none, the grants are approved. Our next action item are the United Steel Workers Local 8751 Letters of Agreement and Fiscal Year 25 Supplemental Appropriation Request. You'll recall that at our last meeting, Executive Director of Transportation, Dan Rosengard, presented these items for the committee's consideration. At this time, I'd like to invite the superintendent to offer final comments.
Thank you, Chair. So tonight we are asking the school committee to take action on 3 items regarding the bus drivers union. In their role as the current school bus vendor for the Boston Public Schools, Transdev employs school bus drivers who are members of the United Steelworkers Local 8751 union. Under the contract between BPS and Transdev, Transdev is reimbursed for all unionized personnel wages and fringe benefit costs as approved by the city and payroll taxes. As we explained at the last meeting on December 4th, Transdev and the School Bus Drivers Union recently reached an agreement on a successor collective bargaining agreement for a 4-year contract through FY28. This agreement was ratified on November 15th. We are asking the school committee to request an FY25 supplemental appropriation from the Boston City Council in the amount of $6.6 million to support the cost of the contract. In addition, we are asking members to approve 2 side letters of agreement between BPS, the City of Boston, and the School Bus Drivers Union, United Steelworkers Local 8751. These letters are continuations of letters that are currently in effect. The school committee members have been updated on the recent agreement and its financial impact, the side letters of agreement, and the actions requested of the school committee. This is outlined in a memo that was shared with you prior to our last meeting. The memo is also posted publicly on the school committee's website, www.bostonpublicschools.com/school committee. BPS Executive Director of Transportation, Dan Rosengard, is here tonight to answer any final questions you may have.
I'm going to ask one quick question, Mr. Rosengard, since we have you here. We've seen steady improvement in transportation now this year. We started slow, as we have in prior years. You had cautioned us at the beginning that to anticipate that, particularly because of the Zoom app being implemented. Now it's fully implemented. We actually had a student testify about it tonight. I think a potential future student intern in your department, I hope.
I think so.
But I'm interested in your assessment of how we're doing now, and number one, and 2, how you feel getting this contract resolved is going to continue to move forward for improvements for us.
Yep, I appreciate that question. So we have continued to make steady improvements in our on-time performance since that, really significant decline that we saw at the start of the school year. For November, the most recent month that we have full data for, we had 92% on-time performance in the morning, which was more than a full percentage point ahead of where we were for the same month last year. Afternoon, we haven't seen as, the same gains, but we have made steady improvement each month. We were at 81% for the morning in November. And then also in November, we had the driver rebid, which went into effect where we saw, a much smaller initial decline in OTP compared to what we've seen in past years. And I think a lot of that is driven by, the GPS navigation tablets that, make things easier for the drivers, particularly when they're doing something new for the first time. So we are seeing that steady improvement. And I think the other thing that really for me, is, meaningful is kind of this time last year, it very much felt like we had hit a plateau and there wasn't much room for growth, from this time of year through the end of the spring. Right now, it feels like between the work that we're doing with the ridership, with the data we're getting from ridership tracking through Zoom, as well as just the, continued weekly feedback loop on, on the normal routing side, there's a lot of kind of untapped potential and room for continued improvement throughout the year in a way that we haven't had in the past. So I think that, that's where we're focusing our efforts right now. And this CBA, helps in a number of ways. One is just in providing that, stability over the next few years so that we have that, that labor stability. Also the, the increased wages, which make sure that our drivers are continuing to get a competitive wage rate, compared to other districts so that we can stay fully staffed and, not just be able to hire drivers, but really be able to retain them and, provide them with a, a good living and a good career. So that, and then I think, that work as directed piece that we talked a little bit about last meeting that's introduced in this contract really provides us some new opportunities that we haven't had in the past, particularly to improve how we provide athletics transportation and some of these other supplemental transportation.
Which is huge that we're getting this and we have not had that before, correct? So exactly the feedback we've been receiving collectively over the past year about concerns on athletics and field trips, you're going to have the ability to address that more closely with this contract?
That's exactly right. Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. He escuchado por familias que ha habido mejoras en la transportación, lo cual es bueno.
Good evening. I have heard through different families that there had been improvements in terms of transportation, which is something very good.
Sin embargo, yo tengo una pregunta para ustedes.
However, I do have a question for you.
Los usuarios directos del transporte escolar son las familias, ¿verdad? Los estudiantes.
So you have to take in consideration that the direct users are the students themselves, the families, the students.
¿Ustedes han recibido, han hecho alguna encuesta, han tenido feedback, han tenido reuniones con las familias para saber cómo se sienten, cómo está la transportación?
So my question to you is, had there been any surveys for the families to evaluate what their opinion is or regarding the performance of transportation itself? How do they feel? Has there been any surveys regarding this with the families directly regarding transportation?
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Member Garcia. It is something that we want to do. That is actually something as well that the Council of Great City Schools recommended in their review, which was September 2022. So, we are constantly talking with families through our transportation hotline, families who come in, talking with schools, going out to schools. So we're constantly interacting with families and trying to, understand and aggregate the trends that we're seeing in terms of their feedback. But we also want and intend to do, very specifically some sort of, feedback survey, for families on their experience and where we can continue to improve. So that is in the roadmap.
Hubiera sido bien interesante hacer esto antes de la aprobación del contrato.
However, I do believe being a little bit proactive, it would have been interesting if we did the service before the approval of the contract.
No, I appreciate that feedback. I'm sorry that we didn't do that.
Thank you.
I know you just mentioned the Council of Great City Schools report, and I know I've spoken to Brandon, who unfortunately is not with us tonight, but one of our concerns, or one of the things that we would hope, is that we would be able to come back at this point in time and have a review of what are the actual recommendations we're taking, because I understand how complicated all of this is, and incrementally the steps, and you all are doing, a yeoman's job of trying to make this all work. But I think it would be helpful to us, particularly as we get ready to go into budget season, to understand, where are we making progress? What's happening with the budget, particularly as we're coming into a budget year that may have some more stressful things that we need to look at within it. But it would be helpful just to understand, what are the actual recommendations that the council recommended, and which of those things that we're actually actively moving forward on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I will say that this is a good point, Sharon. Transportation department, special education, I mean, literally all the departments that we did reports on, we have a tracker, like very extensive, to show, particularly in the high impact recommendations they had, what we've been able to implement. So that's relatively easy for us to be able to provide.
Thank you.
Perfectly timed.
Thank you so
Perfectly
much.
timed, Harry.
All right, thank you all. So we will now take 3 votes, 2 on the letters of agreement A and B, and another on the supplemental appropriation. There's no further discussion. I'll now entertain a motion to approve the United Steelworkers Local 8751 Letter of Agreement A as presented. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Parvex, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Alkins,
Yes.
Ms. Cadet Hernandez, Ms. Lima Barbosa, Ms. Polanco Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson.
Yes,
The motion is approved.
thank you. I'll now entertain a motion to approve the United Steelworkers Local 8751 Letters of Agreement B as presented. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Parvex, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Alkins,
Yes.
Ms. Cadet Hernandez, Ms. Lima Barbosa, Ms. Polanco Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Tran, Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson,
Yes,
and the motion is approved.
thank you. I'll now entertain a motion to approve the fiscal year 25 supplemental appropriation request in the amount of $1,637,486 to support the collective bargaining agreement between Transdev and United Steelworkers Local 8751 is presented. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Parvex, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Alkins,
Yes.
Ms. Cadet Hernandez, Ms. Lima Barbosa, Ms. Polanco Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Tran, Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Robinson.
Yes,
The motion is approved.
thank you.
Thank you. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our second presentation will be an exam schools admission. I'm sorry, I think that's skip one.
David panicked.
Sorry.
I thought I had the agenda right.
Sorry about that. Tonight, we have two presentations. Our first presentation this evening is a finance update. Let's aim to keep the presentation within 20 minutes. Before I turn it over to Chief Financial Officer, Mr. David Bloom, I'll invite the superintendent to give opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair. So tonight, BPS Chief Financial Officer David Bloom will present the district's annual fiscal update. It includes an update on the FY24 budget, progress related to FY25 investments, and the first public preview of the FY26 budget and our financial projections for the coming fiscal year. The update will include where we have made key investments to advance our priorities, including, but not limited to, the implementation of inclusive education district-wide, bilingual programs, hub schools expansion, equitable literacy and high-quality instructional materials, long-term facilities plan, family engagement and support, and recruitment, cultivation, and diversity. The team will dive into some of our findings over the past year and share where we saw lower than expected costs. The presentation will include a summary of the district's pandemic relief fund over the last 3 fiscal years, where we stand as we close out ESSER, and explain how we've used those funds to offset increasing costs. As our enrollment continues to level off following a downward trend, we will continue to focus on prioritizing stabilizing school budgets and investing in our highest needs students, especially students with disabilities, multilingual learners, and multilingual learners with disabilities. In early February, we will return to the school committee for the preliminary FY26 budget presentation, which will be followed by a series of school committee public hearings before the budget is voted on and sent to the City Council. In addition to Chief Bloom, well, it's only Chief Bloom. I think Deputy Chief Financial Officer Blair Dawkins is available, and other members of our leadership team are obviously here to support. So with that, turn it over to you, David.
Thank you, Superintendent. And Dr. Elkins, per your question from earlier, I'm going to just take a moment to shout out the Family and Community Advancement Team and Welcome Services Team. I am going through the school assignment process for the first time as a prospective K-1 parent. And I was not expecting the full range of emotions that would come with that, especially going through my first school preview day. And I've appreciated all the work that the team has put into making that easier for a prospective parent like me, such as having the Google interest form, which I had to fill out a couple times because I have a lot of schools on my list. So I can get regular email updates, and I'm getting communication from schools all the time. I've been very nervous about making sure I make all of my different preview days. So it's been a very exciting, if nerve-wracking process. So shout out to the team doing all that work behind the scenes. I'm here today to present to you a 3-year financial update. This is actually getting very close to a period of time where we transition from operating in 3 fiscal years at a time to a period of time where we're only operating in 2, which will be a great relief to some members of my team. This report will go through school year 24, 24, 25, and a preview of 25, 26. But before I dive into the details, just want to acknowledge that all of our work in finance is trying to ground ourselves in both the BPS Opportunity Achievement Gap Policy and our new Inclusive Education Plan. One of the things I hope you see as I move through tonight's presentation is that you're going to see a lot of similar themes to when I was here with the team last year and talking about the major initiatives we're working on in the district. And this is because our major initiatives are the same, right? We are still working to roll out these big, important changes that are needed for the students of Boston. So the highlights. Fiscal year 24 was another year in our long tradition, I think about 35 years now, of finishing the fiscal year on budget with less than the remaining salary of a paraprofessional as the target. Vice Chair O'Neill, I'm sure, will make a comment about how I didn't quite hit my record from last year of $965, but I still think we were within the margin of error. In the current fiscal year, we are still feeling very confident that we're going to finish the year on track and close out ESSER spending every single cent, though I did just get an update from Desi that suggests we might have a 43-cent problem, but we're working on the accounting for that. We do want to give a couple of updates on our FY25 investments as well. And then finally, a preview, as the superintendent mentioned, of what we've said to schools last week as they got their budgets for school year 26, and in last week's PD with school leaders. So this is sort of this year's update of this slide. Apologies, 34 years, not 35. BPS finished the year with a net surplus of $26,299. These dollars do get returned to the general fund for use by the city. We every year work to ensure that we end the year using all the tools in our toolbox at less than the salary of a paraprofessional. And this year was no different. There were some slight differences in the sort of overage and savings areas inside the FY24 budget. We did see higher than expected costs in temporary employees, transportation, and food services. Transportation was mostly related to transportation out of the district. And then we did identify operational savings from salary and health insurance via vacancies, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. And some savings in utilities costs that weren't quite as high as projected. As we now move into FY25, we are confident that we will continue to end this year on budget. We are continuing to see some higher than expected cost in food services. We think this is mostly related to some slight delays in the construction at our central kitchen that will allow for more efficient and effective delivery of meals to families or to students, I should say. So we are hopeful that these cost increases will get better over time. We actually have some really great news of overspending. I think it's possibly the first time I've said that, in that we are our part-time employees. We are overspending our projections, and this is mostly due to Dan and his team doing an amazing job hiring bus monitors. We did not anticipate being quite so full in those positions this year, which is a great problem to have. And then finally, part of a sort of citywide trend, our health insurance costs have come in a little bit higher than we anticipated. As you'll see sort of in the attached memo that I shared with you, this is a pretty significant multi-million-dollar area of cost increase, something we are managing, and we have resources at our disposal to cover it for 1 year. We're working closely with our partners in the city to ensure that we get this more accurate for 26, and this isn't a problem again. We are seeing some savings from a higher vacancy rate than historical. This is the same thing I've said to you now for basically 3 years. However, we are seeing some improvements in that vacancy rate heading back towards pre-pandemic levels, which is an exciting development. And I mentioned just before that we're seeing some increases in health insurance. One of the ways we're paying that is we are seeing some savings, if you will, from the end of ESSER. We have purchase orders and contracts, things that we had planned to do with ESSER that come in a little bit under budget for a variety of reasons. Maybe something couldn't be delivered on time. Maybe the price estimate ended up coming in lower. When you sweep that across a $270 million grant, that ends up being a couple $1 million of sort of leftover money at the end, right? And we anticipated this coming. We talked a little bit about this with you last year, is how we were going to use this money to help offset costs for school year 25. And that's now what we're doing. So with that in mind, we are very confident that we will finish FY25 on budget. I discussed a couple of times before our vacancy rates. Just as a note, right, because of the size of our district, every 1% of change in our filled rate for positions is about $10 million in salary savings, in salary spending, excuse me. So as you can see, our filled rate before the pandemic was getting to around 98%. We had a real dip in the pandemic years through a combination of a lot of increased positions with ESSER, as well as just sort of some challenges in hiring that I think we're pretty consistent nationwide. Going into 2025, especially if you look at the actual FTE, you'll see a really significant increase in filled positions. We still do have a higher than 2019 vacancy rate. We're sort of down 3.6% in terms of filled positions. However, that is 1.25% improvement from last year. And so we are confident that will continue to improve. So if that's the nuts and bolts of where we are for FY25, I want to step back a little bit and talk about our goals for the FY25 budget. This is the exact slide we laid out with you last spring as we went through the budget approval process. We talked about these 3 major initiatives we were working on to help close opportunity gaps for our students, especially students with disabilities and multilingual learners. And we said this was going to be a 5-year shift. So I'm here to give you an update on what we're doing this year and next year. In our academics office, we've hired over $15 million worth of staff, right? Almost entirely teachers in this first year, to work in schools and help support this team-based approach to inclusive practices that we're working on as a district. We've also hired inclusive education coaches, had stipends for our inclusion planning teams to build their school-based inclusion plans, and really expanded our MTSS work across the district. We've also been planning for new bilingual, multilingual programs. And I believe it was as of last week that all 9 programs were officially approved by DESE, which is very exciting. And you'll see then the financial impact of that in our FY26 proposal. Equitable literacy was also a key part of our FY25 budget, with a focus on high quality instructional materials, support resources, and direct support to students with reading interventionists. Finally, I'll just mention in the academics area that we're very excited that we now are up to 20 hub schools, all with full-time coordinators and 1 citywide coordinator who's helping to sort of manage the work across the district. In our operations team, we've heard a lot, obviously, about the work we're doing in our capital planning and operations, opening new buildings. We were talking about the Carter earlier. It's a very exciting development, but also the Horace Mann is in their new space at the Edwards and really filling in that facility. You heard a little bit from transportation earlier about Zoom and from our students as well as the electric buses, and sort of the work we're doing along that. Finally, I should mention the work of our family and community advancement team and the progress they've made on investments. I actually thought maybe we had a typo when I first saw this number, but there were 25,000 individual touch points with families. This includes calls, emails, walk-ins, and support. Staff provides support in 7 languages. That was really a pretty remarkable number when I saw it. And over 7,000 students participated in summer programming this past summer with over 80% attendance. So what does all this mean as we come into FY26? Well, I'm very excited to say that our major priorities haven't changed, right? We're still focused on these same investments in multilingual learners, in students with disabilities, and inclusive education. So I want to talk a little bit about what is the same and what's a little bit different. In FY25, we stopped using weighted student funding to adjust school budgets. As we went through with you last winter, we made adjustments to budgets starting from the school's existing funding level, increased or decreased based on the number of classrooms or capacity changes, and then prioritized new investments in instructional resources. For FY26, as we're trying to stabilize, right, and build on that work, our priorities remain very similar, right? We are continuing to make classroom and capacity adjustments using the same methodology. We're expanding investments in inclusive practices and investing in bilingual education through the establishment of newcomer dual language programs and full adjustment for any ESL services that are required. Superintendent mentioned enrollment stabilization. This is one of the important things that we are looking at as we go through this process. So I believe this is the first time in this is now my 10th budget cycle with BPS, that we've been in a place where we're able to talk about a multi-year stable enrollment. Technically, we were up this year. It's 86 kids, but it is technically an increase. So I appreciate that. And I think, I think the interesting thing about this is the underlying data about Boston is still true. We are still seeing fewer births to resident families in Boston, and we are still seeing the impact of that in our enrollment patterns. However, that has been paired with a real and lasting increase in multilingual learners through our services we're providing to immigrant and migrant youth. And as we look across our district, we do see that the needs of our students have changed, right? We are serving more multilingual youth, more students with disabilities than we have before. And more importantly, more multilingual learners with disabilities as well. Refresh. Okay. Hey, look at that. My other slide magically appeared. Apologize, this slide is a little bit busy because the lines overlap, but I'll walk you quickly through it. What we want to do is break out 3 categories of students as we talk about the level of need we're seeing in the district. In blue is students who are multilingual learners without disabilities, so only multilingual learners. They don't also have disabilities. In orange is students with disabilities who are not multilingual learners. And then in gray is the intersection of those two, multilingual learners with disabilities. Overall, when you look at this, you can see that historically we were somewhere in between 7,500 and 8,500 multilingual learners without disabilities as a district. For the last 2 years, we've been over 10,000, right? This is a real and significant change for the district. You can also see that the proportion of our students who with disabilities who are also multilingual learners has increased, right? So while the total number of students with disabilities is relatively similar to where we were historically, the number of multilingual learners with disabilities has increased. And we know for school year 25, this was a major area of investment for the district. So I'm going to steal the superintendent's line as we get to the headline of FY26 because I like it. We've had 2 years of really historic budgets in BPS. 2 years ago, we reached this landmark deal with the Boston Teachers Union that allowed us to revamp inclusive practices and do the rollout we're doing now in collaboration with our teachers. That required a really historic budget investment from the city to make it happen in year 1. Then last year, we were planning for the first year of the actual rollout of inclusion. And we were coming off of ESSER. And we went back to the city and we said, we want to make history again and have year 2 of a historic commitment from the city. And the city came through for us again. This year, we're back to a more traditional funding level. But the thing I clarified for principals and school leaders, right? Traditional doesn't mean bad, right? This isn't a budget of cuts. This still allows us to fund major cost increases. So for example, the health insurance increase I talked about earlier, we have full funding for that in our budget increase that, we've talked about with the city. And we are also, in addition to those maintenance costs, being able to invest in really significant ways in key programs around inclusive education, bilingual programs, continuing to grow our work around MTSS and academic support, and continuing high school pathway expansion. Finally, it would be important to mention that the long-term facilities plan still has impacts on our FY26 budget. There are changes that the committee approved last year that are going into place in this year's budget, and we are working very closely with each impacted school community to ensure that transition happens in the best way possible. One of the ways we could have this traditional budget, more traditional level, and still invest in the significant way we're investing is by identifying efficiencies. And the superintendent was very clear when we launched our process with department heads in September. She was very clear. Schools had to do the hard work last year when we left ESSER, right? And they had to make reductions to their ESSER program and make really tough trade-offs. And we all heard about that on this body, right, through the process. That was very difficult. This year, while we're still making adjustments related to classroom changes, opening and closing, and there's still some things happening through the long-term facilities plan that were voted on last year, the real work of finding efficiencies we wanted to put on central office and central office budgets more broadly, right? So both those real central office expenses that you might see in the bowling building, my salary for one, but also those central budgeted school services or school services budgeted centrally. Things that you really would see out in schools like custodians, right? And all these sort of central run programs, all of our summer school is budgeted centrally. We're really trying to identify efficiencies in those programs. The superintendent was very clear. We don't want to reduce services, but we want to take a really close look at what we did. An example of this might be looking at an area of service in the district where we run 4 or 5 different programs, all of whom are seeing outcomes for kids, but maybe one of whom is 10 times more expensive. There are real circumstances like that. And while we think that program is providing value, we may have to make a trade-off to say, okay, that centrally run program might phase out so we can invest in more cost-effective options that are still providing outcomes for kids. As I mentioned before, there are still going to be some areas of increase that fit on the quote unquote central office budget, but these are things that are purely school services budgeted centrally. So the 3 main areas of increase are health insurance as a central office cost, but not really central office, just a central budget. Utilities, same. And then out of district special education tuition and transportation costs. These are just those are the normal sort of inflationary costs of program growth, program expense growth from year to year. The last thing I'll say is not on this list, but there are some cost increases in our facilities department as well for the increased inflationary costs of maintenance contracts and those sorts of things. But all of those dollars are things that will be seen directly in schools. Excuse me. Finally, I wanted to close with talking a little bit about the timeline. Our budget is a year-round process. And I think one of the things we are working to improve in collaboration with you is how we engage the school committee in that process year-round, really showing how the school committee's feedback you give us in meetings in October, November, and April and June, even if they're not directly in the budget process, are key to informing the budget that's before you tonight. So while this meeting technically is the launch of the budget season officially, because schools got their budgets last week, we had PD, really, and I'm not just saying this because I'm the CFO, the whole year is budget season in a way, right? And we're taking your feedback on what we need to do in the budget as we go through the whole process. And so I really appreciate sort of all of your feedback on that. And I can say that your colleagues in the community and in schools are also giving that feedback year round. And with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions from the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. My question is in the page number 9, I think. Actually. En el progreso académico basado en inversiones.
10.
Number 10, yes, thank you. Puedo leer que dice que el 98% de las escuelas tienen coordinadores de sistema de apoyo de múltiples niveles.
So I could read, my question comes from page number 10, and I could read that 98% of schools have MTSS coordinators who create structures for MTSS and monitor services aligned to student needs.
Yes.
En ese sentido, ustedes tienen data que puedan demostrar cuántas estudiantes han atendido, qué plan han hecho de mejora para algunos estudiantes que puedan mostrarnos la data de progreso de qué ha hecho este grupo en particular, este grupo de los coordinadores.
So do you have any data that could show us what has been the progress of this group of coordinators? How many students that they have served?
I don't have that data with me now, but I think we can certainly get you it.
Yeah, I think Leslie Ryan Miller can as well. I think there's been several things with MTSS. One was establishing a system because it didn't exist before. And then secondly, it was creating the coordinator position as a way to ensure that it was institutionalized in the school and that the teams would be regularly meeting to talk about the tiered supports for students brought forward. So part of that progress is in the team formation, how often the teams are meeting, and then the number of students that get put before the team during those meetings. But Leslie, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Sure. No, that's exactly the role that they play. One other thing I would just add that's critically important is that they're responsible for the documentation of services that students need. So outside of students who receive IEPs. So when we have general education students that might require additional services, like potentially support from a reading interventionist or other tiered services that are in a school, the MTSS coordinator supports grade level teams or content teams with documenting in Panorama what those tiered supports are and interventions that a student needs. We reflect on those centrally to make sure that the school has the interventions and supports that are needed. So we can look in Panorama and see, okay, we have this number of students that might require service from a reading interventionist. And if it doesn't seem like there's enough capacity, we can think district-wide about how we mitigate that need and we provide the services that are needed for students.
Yeah. Another example would be chronic absenteeism. And so the MTSS team in Panorama is responsible for ensuring that an attendance plan is created for a student that is showing chronic absenteeism. Either they've already reached it or they're approaching it. And that can include outreach to the home, a home visit, a contract, an attendance contract with the student. There's a variety of things. So they're really supporting in that tiered way the academic and social emotional needs of the students.
Dentro del trabajo de estos coordinadores está la responsabilidad de que los padres reciban la carta cuando los estudiantes necesitan un IEP.
So within the responsibilities of these coordinators, do the parents receive a letter when one of these students need an IEP?
So parents are involved in the process of getting an IEP. So there's certainly documentation that goes home if either sometimes a family could request services, but if there's believed to be a need, then there's a process that, of course, families go through that I'm sure Christine Trevisan could speak better to than I certainly can.
Y que gracias, Cristín, porque he escuchado algunos padres que me han dicho, no he recibido la carta, estoy viendo que mi niño no lee como debería leer y no sé por qué no he recibido una carta de que mi niño necesita apoyo extra. Entonces, por eso es mi pregunta con esta comisión, con este equipo de trabajo, si tiene que ver con esto también.
Yes, and thank you, Christine. And yes, my question arises because I have heard certain parents or parents that have come up to me and have told me I have not received a letter yet, and I have seen that my child is not reading at the level that he's supposed to be reading, and I have not received a letter. So I want to know if this is within this team that needs to do this.
So thank you for having me. The MTSS process is a process to support students and give them the extra supports they may need. If a student is getting, for example, reading intervention for 6 to 8 weeks and they're showing growth, typically the team should be notifying a parent that the student is receiving those supports, right? They're general education supports, but that they're receiving them and making progress. If they're concerned, based upon the data they collect through that process, that the student's not making progress, they could refer that for a special education evaluation. Sometimes you also say, we thought the problem was this. Sometimes we think, when you think of reading and learning how to read, you think it's decoding the words, but sometimes it's comprehension. So we might do 6 more weeks looking at comprehension than, to address that. If the MTSS team is concerned that this may be a result of a disability, it does get moved forward to the special education team, which is the COS at the school. And then, of course, the parent would be notified if they're suspecting a disability and doing an evaluation. My recommendation would be any parent that has concerns about their child's reading or anything, they should absolutely reach out to their school. That's the first place to go. And they could, let them know what your concerns are. Talk to the people that are there to say, is he getting any additional supports? Is this something I should be concerned about? As parents, we're often worried about things, and teachers may not be as concerned as we are. So I think that's the first step I would recommend.
I also think it's an interesting question because I think part of why that 98% is so critical, it should be 100, but the 98% is critical, is because without a strong MTSS structure and a coordinator ensuring it, as a district, we were skipping a really important step of documenting what we're trying and making sure the school has supports to try. And we were, unfortunately, I think, over-identifying students for special education and skipping a really important step. Now that MTSS is there, we can put supports in place, many of which work, stabilize the student, and then actually help the student to grow so that they don't get identified for special education service when that's not actually what they need. So I can't emphasize enough Sarah J's work, Leslie's work, this whole structure of MTSS we've worked on now for 2.5 years. And it's a continuation of like progress. We have to keep training, ensuring schools have it, ensuring those meetings are happening. All that documentation gets put forward to their department.
Y ya finalmente, ¿cuántas personas lo integran este grupo?
So lastly, how many people are on this team?
¿Es un solo coordinador?
Yep.
It's just one coordinator?
So it's one coordinator per school, and they work with various grade level teams or content teams at a school.
Porque es mucho para una sola persona en escuelas grandes.
Because that could be a lot for just one person in a big school.
Porque tenemos escuelas con muchos estudiantes con altas necesidades, y este coordinador tiene que hacer este trabajo. Es mucho. Yo
So-
pienso que debemos continuar pensando cómo contratar más personal para que ayuden a estos coordinadores.
So yes, because we have this coordinator that is in a big school with a lot of students that have special needs. I believe that we should start thinking about hiring help for these coordinators because this could be overwhelming.
Sure. So it certainly is a big job. And one of the things that's really important is just the centralized support for those MTSS coordinators. So they get together with Sarah J., who's the executive director of MTSS, every month. And they talk about not only professional learning so that they can really put the role in place with fidelity, but they do also talk about problems of practice, caseloads, et cetera. So we're at least able to have a touch point with schools to know if there is a struggle that we need to address.
Yeah. I think there's other structures that support. There's a student support team in every school, and that will have on it a combination of counselors, nurse, uh, administrator, educators, special educators, could be the COS, it could be, and that team is there to really move the student forward. What MTSS does is it makes sure the structures are happening, the teams are meeting, and that communication is really flowing. But when it comes to the student level, like for a special education student, they have an IEP team, they have a COS in the building, they have an AD for special education. So there's lots of layers of support for a special education student. So it's really, we were missing some key structures that we had to make sure the teaming in schools, and MTSS is one of those. They're going to reach out if, for instance, they see a gap in service or they see a gap of need. They might reach out to Leslie around curriculum. They might reach out to Leslie around reading intervention for general education. They might reach out to Kay Seal and Christine if they see a lot of special education students bubbling up and they see a need. But they're really working on a structure to bring people together to communicate. Student support team has like a really deep role with the students, and that's equally important.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just have one question, and it's related actually to one of your appendix slides. Looking at what we know is particularly the trend of newly enrolled students in our district, and you note that exclusively that those numbers are coming from multilingual learners like in the district. So this is actually, and my presentation is slide 28, yes. So what's interesting about this particular slide to me is wondering what particular percentage of the 978 and then 700 from previous years is due to multilingual learners. And then do you have any just forethought on what that means for projections that might be going towards teacher pipeline as programs, hiring, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, you really hit the nail on the head with that, I think. So you're sort of seeing, we had, about 10 years ago, we had the first sort of end of a big wave of this in school year 15-16, right? And we really saw then those, sort of the new multilingual learners coming through the district really drop off during the pandemic. And so when we started to see that increase again in school year 21-22, and sort of going forward, I think the superintendent and Dr. Chen and the Joel and the team have done a lot of work to build up new multilingual learner programs. We have these 9 new programs that are opening now, but there's also the expansion of BADA to BADA East, and who are serving a lot of the students who come in through the year. I think what we see is, the distribution of the 978 or the 710 or the 691 on this slide, it's not even. It's not every school getting 6 or 7 kids. A lot of the need is concentrated in certain schools, and I think you'll see a lot of overlap between those schools and the schools getting new programs as we move into this. So one example I think, that would be relevant is, for a long time, the English historically has been a school that gets a lot of new students when we see these influxes of students for a lot of really good reasons. Its location, right? Its services it provides. And so the English is now going to have a newcomer program that was formally approved in one of these new models from DESE. That's one of the programs that's being built out for next year. And so I think, we've really ramped up the district's capacity to do this work.
Right. I would add to that, I think our newcomer programs we have also increased those, and at the high school level, where we've seen a lot of unaccompanied minors coming in. We've also, I think SLIFE is another great example where we've had to open programming and ensure the social emotional support is in that programming. That's been a fast growing program. It's all in response to us looking at the profile of the students coming in and what they need. And so that gets then reflected. I think for us, special education and ESL certified staff is really critical, so much so that we're looking within OHC right now to talk about, early hiring of those positions, knowing that we're always going to have a position for somebody that has those certifications. And I think for our multilingual learners with disabilities, that's where somebody that may have an ESL cert and is delivering ESL, but also has a special education cert and has experience with special education, can see what is language-based development and what is special education. And so we're really trying to hire in and create pipelines. This is why our para pipelines are also critical, because that is our largest group of multilingual staff. So I think these are great questions, and I think relative to the budget, you would see in the FTEs, as you did the last 2 years, our heavy hiring is all students with disabilities. So basically special education and ESL.
Do we expect this distribution to be lasting and throughout, I don't know long say, but
I think, this chart, if you look at where the drop off happened on this chart, there was a moment in time that's very similar to a moment in time we're going through right now at the federal level. I think the thing we don't know is what the impact of that will be going forward. And, I can steal your line or I can let you say it, Superintendent, but we don't know whether Boston's going to, become the safe haven, and we might see an even bigger influx from students who are now, sort of more all over the country, or if we might see a drop off like this one. So for now, these are the students we have, these are the students we're going to serve. And so we're going to build the programming for them. And if we do see a drop off, we'll sort of think about how to manage that going forward. But the great privilege we have in Boston is we can afford to build the programs, even in that uncertainty, to make sure the students are getting the services they need. And so, I'm very happy to be in a position that we're able to say, even with the uncertainty, we're building the programs for the students.
That's right. We're a district that welcomes all and serves all. And so we very much hope that we continue to see the vibrancy of so many of our immigrant and migrant families and students.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief Bloom, for this presentation. So I cannot let it go without repeating 34th year, consecutive year of a balanced budget. There are not a lot of school districts in this state or in this country that can say that. So congratulations to that. And I can't help but think of our former Chief Financial Officer and Interim Superintendent John McDonough, who started that trend.
He did.
And clearly has, it has been continued this past year under your stewardship as well, though I can think of a few school leaders that would be disappointed that 26,000 was left on the table.
I knew the feedback was coming, Vice Chair.
Well, I have to say,
I have to sit here and take it. It's fair.
Much more importantly, it is important that it's a balanced budget, and that's important to the taxpayers of this city. So for such a huge budget, that in fact that it is balanced shows great fiscal stewardship, and I thank you for that. I remember when weighted student funding was put in. And one of the key findings of it was we discovered a lot of inequities in our system of schools that, quite frankly, were underfunded and other schools that were overfunded. The old theory of the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Or political favoritism, that type of thing. My big concern about moving away from weighted student funding is that inequities can reappear. Help me out with the philosophy of how we ensure inequities do not reappear intentionally or unintentionally.
For sure.
As we move away from that formula, what is replacing it to make sure there are checks and balances so that we are equitable in how we address the inequities in our system?
I think I really appreciate that question. And it's been one of the biggest conversations inside finances as we think about, and frankly, with our steering committee that worked on this project and others, has been how do we define equity and how do we ensure that we're meeting and sort of redefine equity from what it was in the weighted student funding world. But I think one of our biggest takeaways from weighted student funding, and the thing that will not change and is not changed, and you will see it in your budget documents you get this year, is the number one rule is transparency, right? We have to show everything about how we made what decisions were made, how they were made, and every dollar that every school got, where it came from. So that means any special deal that happens, anything that doesn't follow a specific rule, a preordained thing, will be out there and will be listed, right? And so I think, there were examples of this during weighted student funding, and we would have them on our sort of allocation tracker you would receive, and we would discuss them. Now, we think we are doing a pretty good job of avoiding them being the sort of special deals that are bad, and instead being sort of special deals that actually are appropriate for a specific situation or circumstance where the rules or the math might not perfectly describe the situation. So an example of a rules-based special deal that we had implemented in the weighted student funding era and are continuing is when you get a new ABA sub-separate classroom, we typically assign one new strand coordinator for every 4 classrooms, right? But what we said is essentially we're going to update that rule, taking away from weighted student funding, and instead say, even if you're only starting 1 classroom, we're going to give you a half-time position. And then even if you only have 3, you'll get a full-time position. Because what we found was when you had just a small fraction of a position, it sort of didn't work. And so even though the rule would say, if you have 1, you only get a quarter of a person's time, we sort of made this special deal. But I think the thing that makes these special deals that happen equitable is they're not actually, the special part of them is that they're different from the existing formula, but they actually are consistently applied to any school in the same circumstance. So we do a comprehensive review if we're going to make any deviation from policy, right? We're going to have a review of every school that might meet that need, that level of service, and then we'll adjust it. I think the other thing that's really driving our shift away from weighted student funding is this changing definition of equity. And I think the thing that weighted student funding did really well is dollar per pupil equity, right? It was researched multiple times. We were in national studies. All the evidence was it is equitable when you review pure dollar per pupil. And yet we would all sit up here together. We would be out in schools and we would hear the real challenges that schools would be going through. And they would say, I hear you that our dollar per pupil might be right, but come see what we're experiencing. And one of the big sort of takeaways from that, as we sort of tried to dig in and figure out what was going wrong, is the thing that weighted student funding really struggled with was twofold. First was, as class sizes decreased, dollar per pupil increases were limited just to the teacher classroom ratio, and meant schools had less money for all of those around the classroom things that they needed, even if their dollar per pupil was high, right? And so we had schools with much higher dollar per pupil that felt poor relative to some other schools that felt quote unquote rich, but had a much lower dollar per pupil. The other thing was, this is sort of the example I use more in the community when we're talking about it is, if you're a school with 300 kids and your enrollment goes down 5, your school is effectively exactly the same. Nothing's actually really different about the way your school is going to operate with 5 fewer kids. But in a weighted student funding world, that could be a $50,000 budget cut for your school. And that might not seem like a lot relative to what I'm sure is a multi-million-dollar school budget, but the amount of wiggle room in a school budget is very limited. And so that $50,000 cut was really big for schools. And then maybe the next year it would swing back and they would get the $50,000 back, but then they'd already cut the thing and now they have to put it back. And it was creating all of this uncertainty. So I think a lot of the fundamental, I'm sorry for the long answer. It's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about over the last couple of years. I think we are trying to keep some of the core principles of weighted student funding: transparency, school-based decision-making, right? Equity, obviously, right? But also learn the lessons of what worked and what didn't. And the other thing that I really appreciate about the direction we've gotten from the superintendent on it, and every year in budget season, we have to sort of calibrate on this, is we're not going to move very fast, right, to implement a new system and do sort of one of the challenges with weighted student funding implementation was, a bunch of schools got told you're overfunded. Now you're gonna have to make a whole bunch of cuts. And a bunch of schools got told you're underfunded. Here's a bunch of new money. Those second group of schools were very happy, right? But the first group of schools, obviously not so much. And I think one of the things you'll see in this year's budget process as we go through it is the change for this year is the schools that might be we believe are potentially relatively underfunded, they're getting a sort of disproportionate share of the new money. It's not actually disproportionate, though it's appropriate. And schools that have been historically, we believe slightly overfunded for a variety of reasons, are not getting as much new money, but they're also not cut. And we think that'll help us bring the system into balance into this new sort of reimagined school funding world. And I have gotten feedback from multiple people that we need a better name. So there'll be a separate conversation about workshopping that.
So let me carry that thought process just a little bit farther, because from a general fund viewpoint,
yes,
a base BPS budget, you can say they're not filling cuts or that type of thing. But laid over that is the ESSER funding that is going away.
Yes.
So when you talk to school leaders, we have some school leaders who said, hey, I knew that was going to be going away. I didn't use it to hire people. I used it for other things. And quite frankly, usually I'm more experienced school leaders.
Right.
And they're in great shape. But I anticipate we will have folks, both school communities and school leaders and school communities, who will feel, well, my budget is being cut, because they're looking at the general fund budget they had plus the ESSER funding, and now the ESSER funding's going away, which has been telegraphed for several years, but from a total amount available for a school, it's going to feel like it's less.
I think we did. So in this year's budget, most schools do not have any ESSER funding in FY25. So they actually mostly did that work through last year's budget season. So actually, we're pretty confident that the vast majority of our schools are seeing a net increase. I think there are some schools, and we will inevitably sort of hear from them and work with them on issues, who are seeing real reductions due to classroom changes, right, and enrollment declines. And I think, even if we're not doing a weighted student funding pure system anymore, we are still making adjustments for enrollment, and those adjustments are always difficult. And I don't want to take that away from the experience of a school community. But I think what we're really trying to be laser focused on is ensuring continuity in the student experience, and that all of those services that wrap around the student experience, the librarian, the school counselor, the social worker, right? The partnerships that we're able to maintain those programs and build more of them in our highest need schools.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's certainly a very good argument that the ESSER dollars funded districts like ours at what they should be funded, right? I would be the first one to say that. I think what we did over the last 2 years, two previous budgets,
That's true.
was to very strategically work with school leaders and communities around what to take off of ESSER and get on to the hard dollars. And those were the historic budgets that David referenced. And so what you really didn't hear in our case that you heard nationally and you heard even in our state was big layoffs and, just schools decimated because we did it very strategically and because the city was able to give us funding to actually build in and insulate some of those very things. So we're pretty much through the ESSER piece. And now moving forward, the most important thing is that I think it's a couple of things. I think one is that there's a stability in the budget that folks can count on. And so when we say sort of a traditional budget, it's much more in line with the types of budget increases that we would expect or be able to count on in future years. I think the second is the efficiency pieces and us constantly being as efficient as possible as a system and in schools to make sure that the resources that we're investing are translating to the outcome that students want. And then I think to David's point, it's constantly seeking from an equity lens how to make sure that schools are getting the resources that they need in an equitable fashion. So I mean that is the work I think of the finance and the budget team. You'll meet, David's building his team out, and I know he wants to do some introductions, but that is going to be the work of that group going forward.
Great, thanks. And just, Mr. Bloom, since you said this was a multi-year budget, right, 3 years, so what, correct me if I'm wrong, it had to be committed by September and spent by December, or committed previously and spent by September?
Yeah, we can go there. So,
Okay, thank you.
Yes, so it's obligated is the word
Obligated,
that
right.
the federal government likes to use. Obligated or spent by September 30th.
Of this year,
past
2024,
year, yeah,
correct, yeah.
yeah. So,
Yep.
we have obligated all of the money. We then have until 2 weeks from today, more or less, to spend
Okay.
almost all of it. There is something called late liquidation, which we have been approved for. The federal government allows you, as long as you've obligated the project, to apply for an basically 18-month extension of the spending deadline for specific ESSER programs. For us, these are mostly facilities projects. There's a couple of other things in there. We are trying to spend it all by this summer, so we're well in advance of the deadline. But if you can look in your appendix, there's about 3.5 million of approved extensions, and those have all been fully approved already.
Right.
So we are on track to spend every penny, well, except for maybe 43 cents, depending upon what happens between me and Desi, of the $276 million.
And separately, we'll have a look back on, was that spend worthwhile and
Yeah.
achieve the goals that, we wanted with it, which was to help with the academic loss due to COVID, improve facilities,
Yes, we're working on
discovered
that.
during the pandemic, et cetera.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bloom.
I was originally going to ask a question which Mr. O'Neill already asked about, pertaining around like how the removal of weighted funding was going to affect like how schools funding and how we're going to ensure that it's equitable. Yes, my other question would be how in determining like the investments that are made to like schools, how are students in the community like contributing to like what investments should be made? What voice do they get within it? Besides like looking at like statistics of schools and looking at the populations, like how do they get a direct voice within it?
I really appreciate that question. There's a few ways. So last year we had a working group of parents, students, community members come together to help us evaluate weighted student funding and what a reimagined school funding system could look like. Those recommendations are heavily influencing the way we're moving forward now. I think we also have a number of sort of community feedback events that happen over the course of the process. The main way, though, that we get community feedback through our budget is through our school site council or governing board process. So each of our schools should be working with their school site council or governing board, which includes student voice at the high school level, and they should be providing an update on the budget, proposals for the planned budget. The school site council reviews the entire budget, actually takes a vote on the discretionary budget as a committee. And I encourage, if there are any school site councils watching or governing boards, they're encouraged to write a letter to attach to, there's a form they have to fill out to say they were involved in the process. And those letters provide us with feedback on how the process went, any things that feedback they have on the budget itself. And also, they can inform the work we're doing. We're not able to necessarily take all the feedback in 1 year, but we can definitely sort of take the lessons we learned through each budget season and apply them to the next. The last thing I would just say, one of the things we lost during the pandemic that I would love to restart, and this is a sort of plug, but we can figure about it later, is we used to have some school site some BSAC budget events where we would meet with BSAC and we would talk about the budget, talk about different priorities, and get feedback from BSAC members and anyone else they invited. So I would love to sort of restart that process, and we can have conversations offline about how to get that restarted again.
Is there like, how often is like the school site council like advertised to like students or people in the community so that they can know about it? Because this is like the first time I've heard of it, and I want to know like if students get the opportunity to hear of it and maybe get involved. How like
Yes, ooh,
Yeah, so I think on school site council and the governing boards, a lot of times leaders will reach out to their student government. So if there's a student government in place, sometimes it's the president that serves on it or the vice president on it, or sometimes they'll just ask for like a member elect that wants to. But generally, I think leaders will try to recruit from folks that are kids that are already doing and active within whatever structure they have. I also think BSAC, I think to CFO Bloom's point, I think BSAC would be great to sit down and have some conversation. We had a wonderful town hall with youth probably about 3 weeks ago that you were at actually. And I think, we heard, I think from students, some things that are very consistent with what students will say about social, emotional, mental health supports, facilities, and food, certainly. And then I think we heard a couple of other things, but I think, it's as many forms as we can to kind of get that input. But at the local school level, it's just really important that student representation, whether it's coming through student government or whether it's through the school site council rep, that schools are getting that feedback, school leaders are getting that feedback.
thank you. I would look forward to like any involvement with BSAC.
It's great.
Thank you very much for this update and all the work that you're doing as we move forward. One question I have for you is, are we going to get that book?
Yes, let me give you an update on the much discussed budget book. We are on track. I think our current timing update, as we've been sort of looking at what other districts do with their budget books, is I think our goal is going to be to get it to you in the run up to school vacation week in February. So we won't have it necessarily for the first hearing, but I hope we have it well in advance of the 3-5 hearing. And the reason for that mostly is we're literally building the budgets with schools until January 27th, like the last possible moment we need to prep the documents for you. It like goes right from those tables straight to translations and out to all of you. So we need a couple weeks basically from the 27th to put everything in and publish it. I may be being a little bit optimistic about how that publishing process works. It's not my area of expertise, but I'm hopeful that in that sort of 3-week period in between when we're basically done crafting the budget and school vacation week, we can get that book to you.
Right. Yeah. My other question is, I think it's even complicated for me to try to figure out how I want to say it. many conversations we keep hearing about, as we are moving towards full inclusion, how complicated that is at the school level. We're looking at how our student bodies' needs have changed
Yes.
over the years, to the point that our general ed students are almost the minority of students that we have. Yet we are asking teachers to do any number of things, and we are hearing the pushback around what they want to refer to as inclusion done right, et cetera. How can we take a step back, particularly as we are looking at moving away from, weighted student formula, to look at what we have learned thus far in the new inclusion work, and are we budgeting what we need? Do we really
Right.
have the resources, both in terms of dollars, but also in terms of skill set?
Yeah.
And needs of the children that we are seeing, both linguistically as well as special needs, and then
For
and
sure.
how do we rectify that?
Well,
Budget alone won't do it.
No.
Exactly.
It's the sort of the bigger issue of achievement gap issues, all of the issues we keep talking about that are coming to a full head as we are shifting how
Yeah.
we structure the district.
I will say, so we're, I think, 3 months and 2 weeks into the actual rollout. I think it's so funny for me to think about that, because I think we've been talking about it for 2 years, right? But we're actually only 3 months in. And I think some of the big things we've seen in terms of the finance part of things that I can speak to is we're really shifting what we look at when we determine student need, away from this very like boxes and classrooms lens to really specific student groupings and instructional minutes and the needs of kids. And I think this year at professional development, just last week, it was the quote unquote budget professional development, but it was basically a 50-50 split between finance and then academics on the other side, talking to school leaders about the way they can document the needs for their groupings. And one of the things I said to the school leaders in that meeting was, we think this works for most schools in the new way we're doing this, in the way we're rolling out the investment and the guidance from those departments for most schools in most circumstances. What that means, of course, right, is it's not going to work for everyone, because it's impossible to roll one formula out that's going to work perfectly for everyone. But the real advantage we have in the lessons learned is that we've been able to collaborate with the academics team and build out a really strong process, I think, for reviewing student need and identifying the areas where things don't work. And I think the other thing I just want to acknowledge from sort of my perspective on this from a finance lens is we do still have, because we're 3 months in and we're only doing grades K0, K1, K2, 7, and 9 this year. If you're a teacher in a K-6, and you teach in grades 1 through 6, which is a majority of teachers in K-6, you haven't necessarily felt a huge amount of change in what your classroom experience looks like. And so I could see how it could be frustrating to feel like my school's budget hasn't really done anything new for me yet. And the thing I'd just say is it's coming, right? It's a multi-year investment. We're really doing the work. And I think, are there some individual areas where we're struggling either with resources, hiring, or training in some of the schools that are doing the rollout? I'm sure we are. But actually, by and large, when we look at just those rollout grades in the schools we're doing implementation, we see things working mostly as designed. And so we're just sort of hopeful that will continue to grow.
Yeah, I think the other pieces I would add to that is I think that the academics team has worked in the Office of Specialized Services in OMME. They've worked to create, for the first time, sort of like a real guidance around what types of classes, ratios, supports, and then with that is sort of a tool set that school leaders can use. One of the things that's most valuable, like when you think of the schedule as a school leader, the schedule is generally about 80 to 85% of your budget, because that's your people. And so we've spent a lot of time talking to leaders about how they can more effectively use grouping so that students can get an experience of inclusion or partial inclusion with the resources that they have, but doing it in a way that's not overwhelming. The other thing I will say is that with any adoption, and let's just say innovation, with any adoption, the adoption curve is slow at the beginning, and then it starts to go up, and then it kind of levels. We are definitely seeing that with inclusion, right? When we look at the number of students who, through the IEP team, are being recommended to be included. So I think we're trying to pace the field in a way that allows for mindset change, adult, capacity building, and at the same time allow for things that we might not have expected that we need to either add resource in or we need to address in a different way. So it's all coming together. I think PD for us is a big piece in the capacity building for our staff is, over the next several years, to me, a big priority.
Well, I would love to also just take a quick moment to thank the team who does 98% of the work that I get to sit up here and talk to you about. Our budget director, Serena LaRock, is now in her second budget season and acting basically like I did in my fourth. Chris Williams, our assistant budget director, is a longtime member of the budget team and is bringing a lot of his legacy, history, and experience to that. Then, of course, the team members, Christina, Mary, Salam, Trey, Ty, and G are working tirelessly to do all the things. And then I want to introduce you to the person who's keeping everything running as well. This is our new Deputy Chief Financial Officer, Blair Dawkins. She's newly returned to finance, but not at all new to the district or BPS. And you'll be seeing a lot more from her if you've noticed any improvements in your grants documentations over the last few months. She's been working really hard on that as one of many projects. And so I just wanted to make sure to introduce you to Blair as we get started in the process, and you'll be seeing a lot more of her.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome.
It's a great team.
Yes.
Great team.
Thank you, and we look forward to seeing more of you in the next couple of months. So thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. So our second presentation will be an exam schools admission policy recommendation. I'll invite Chief of Data, Information and Systems Improvement, Ms. Monica Hogan, to come forward with the presentation. While she gets settled, I'd like to invite the superintendent to offer opening remarks. We want to aim to keep the presentation under 20 minutes, and a reminder to our presenters to speak slowly to assist our interpreters. And I'll now turn it over to the superintendent.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair. So we'd like to share some data related to the exam school admissions policy changes this evening and bring forward a policy recommendation for your consideration. As we prepare for our 5th year of implementation of the revised process, we want to balance responding to feedback while making data-informed adjustments. Tonight, we're proposing a slight update to the policy that will help us achieve that goal while staying true to the intent and spirit of the policy. Shortly, you'll hear from Monica Hogan, who is our Chief of Data Information and Systems Improvement. Monica has been through almost every iteration with this, but she's going to provide some recent data on exam school admissions and share the recommendations going forward. We're asking for your vote when the school committee resumes at the January meeting next month. In January of 2024, the school committee approved a change to the policy that took effect during the admission cycle for the 24-25 school year. At the time, the school committee voted to revise the number of additional points that students receive who attend a school where more than 40% of the students are economically disadvantaged. That number was changed from 10 additional points across all tiers to a number of points determined by the tier that the student lives in, and that ranged from 2 to 10 points. That policy change was intended to address the fact that some students needed a composite score higher than 100 points to get into the exam school of their choice, which obviously was impossible for students who did not receive additional points. During the last application cycle, there were 11 seventh grade applicants who had a perfect score, and all of those students received an invitation to their first choice. Tonight, we're recommending an additional minor change to the admissions policy. We're asking to consolidate from 8 to 4 tiers. If approved, it would mean that students in each tier would be considered for a higher percentage of invitations, an increase from 12.5% to 25% per tier. This change simplifies the policy. It mitigates changes due to minor variability in the American Community Survey data, and it lessens the disparities in access between students in geographically similar areas. We recognize that there are areas for additional analysis based on feedback we've heard from the community as well as from school committee members. As we enter into the 5th year of implementation of the policy, as the policy suggests, we're committed to reviewing all available data around areas of concern that have been raised. And as you'll see in the presentation that Monica will show shortly, we'll look at these areas more closely this spring, address the questions that come from them, and then look holistically at the data set and return with future policy recommendations for implementation to impact the following school year. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Chief Hogan.
Thank you, Superintendent, and good evening, school committee members. We're going to look at some data tonight, and before we do that, wanted to just remind you of what the admissions policies have been for the past 5 years, because they have been slightly different each of the last 5 years. So the school year 2021 was the last school year that utilized the ISEE and GPA and did a straight citywide ranking of highest performing students. School year 21-22 was the policy that was a 1-year interim policy that utilized a 20% citywide round and an 80% round where invitations were distributed by zip code. There was no test in that school year. School year 22-23 was the first year of the policy that was passed in 2021. The first year of implementation used socioeconomic tiers and additional points, but only grades. And then in school year 23-24, we introduced a test again. So this was a policy that used socioeconomic tiers, the additional points, and then grades and a test score for students. And then in 24-25, the last school year of admissions that have been fully complete, used the socioeconomic tiers as well as additional points, but as the superintendent just mentioned, this was where we had the small policy change last year, where the number of points you received was dependent on the tier you lived in. So this slide looks at the number of applicants for 7th grade by socioeconomic tier. Since 22-23, the total number of grade 7 applicants has slightly ticked up, and the proportion of BPS applicants has remained steady. We've seen modest growth in the number of applicants in tiers 2 through 6, but a larger decline in the number of applicants in tiers 7 and 8, where the invitation rate is lower. The next slide looks at the invitation trends by student group. So we're looking at students identified as economically disadvantaged, students identified as multilingual learners, and students with disabilities. And so over the past 4 years, we have seen an increase for each of these groups. But what you can see in the graph on the right is that the dotted lines represent the percentage of those groups overall for the district. And so while we have seen an increase, the groups are not at the same level as they are district-wide. The policy change has also resulted in a shift of the geographic distribution of invitations for 7th grade. The maps on these slides are a visual representation of the percentage of invitations received by zip code, comparing school year 2021 to school year 24-25. And so we can see that the distribution of invitations in school year 24-25 is more closely aligned to the distribution of school-aged children in Boston. And finally, this slide shows the invitation rate by socioeconomic tier. or the percentage of applicants in each tier that received an invitation in the last 2 admission cycles. And those are the last 2 admission cycles that did use a test, as a reminder. So you can see almost all students in tiers 1 through 4 received an invitation, while approximately half of students in tiers 7 and 8 received an invitation. Before I go into the policy recommendation under consideration, we wanted to share some additional information on the impact of last year's policy change. As a reminder, last year, this body voted to change the number of additional points that students received based on the school attended in the previous year, based on the tier they live in. That meant calculating the point differential by tier between students receiving points and students not receiving points, and using that number as the number of additional points students would receive rather than the original 10 points in the policy. This was intended to ensure that students with composite scores of 100 prior to receiving additional points were still able to receive an invitation to their first choice school if they did not receive additional points. And what we saw in the 24-25 application cycle was that there were 11 applicants with a perfect score of 100, and all of these students received an invitation to their first choice school. The policy recommendation before you tonight is to consolidate the number of tiers from 8 to 4. Under the current policy, each tier receives an equal allocation of invitations, or 12.5%, as there are 8 tiers currently. By consolidating the number of tiers from 8 to 4, students will now be considered for 25% of invitations rather than 12.5%. This change simplifies the policy and also responds to some of the feedback we have been hearing frequently, that families across the street from each other may live in different tiers, even though they are in geographically similar areas. This change will lessen the number of places in the city where these disparities occur. To understand the impact of this recommendation, we conducted 2 simulations using the school year 23-24 and school year 24-25 applicant pools. The table on the right shows how the tiers were combined in the simulation from 8 to 4. So tiers 1 and 2 became tier 1, tiers 3 and 4 became tier 2, tiers 5 and 6 became tier 3, and tiers 7 and 8 became tier 4. And then this slide shows 2 visual representations of the tier map. The map on the left using 8 tiers, and the map on the right using 4 tiers. In the map on the right, you can see that there are still areas where a tier 1 census tract may border a tier 4 census tract. However, with fewer tiers, there is less differentiation between geographic areas. And you can see the colors sort of smooth out more in the map on the right, because there are less tier options to consider. So looking forward, we are asking for the school committee to vote on this policy recommendation at a school committee meeting in January to go into effect for the current admissions cycle. And additionally, we will undertake additional and deeper analysis this spring to better understand the multi-year impact of the 2021 policy and consider potential future changes. The last slide outlines some of the potential areas for additional analysis that we have heard come up through community feedback and comments from school committee members. We will be working over the spring to better understand the answers to these questions to inform future policy recommendations. These questions include some questions around the calculation and sizing of socioeconomic tiers, whether or not the policy can consider individual socioeconomic status, the impact on top performing students, ensuring access for students with disabilities and multilingual learners, and better understanding what the student experience is once they enroll at an exam school. And with that, Chair, I will pass it back to you for questions.
Just a couple, and this is more data that I'm looking forward to seeing. So we talked about this a little bit. So next year is the first graduating cohort under the most recent exam school policy.
So First students who were admitted under the 2021 policy, the students who were admitted in 22-23 using tiers and grades only.
Right.
Those students are now in ninth grade.
Those students are.
So it's been, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Oh, no, so I mean, I think also, this aligns with my other question just around just wanting, to see, the invitation, trend data, broken out by like race and ethnicity if possible. I just would be very curious to see like that shift and everything like that. I mean, there's obviously some intersections with socioeconomic status, but I'd like to see it.
Yep, we can provide that.
Yeah, so thank you for this work. I know this has been a quite a process. As the chair always says, we spend a lot of time talking about exam school policy, which take up, time talking about the rest of our students as well. It's also a matter of importance to our families. I was struck by a couple of things in your presentation. The first was the look at the change that we made last year, where we substituted real data for what had been a hypothetical. So we had a hypothetical of 10 points, right? It was an assumption of what the difference was between tier 1 and non-tier 1 schools. And
Title 1.
Title 1, excuse me, right, thank you. Title and tiers, right? So Title 1 poverty deemed by the US government to be poverty level schools. And so we substituted real data for a hypothetical. And because we were concerned about applicants who had received 100 and were overtaken by someone who had received 10 points and they weren't and were not getting admission. And that was both in the data we had seen as well as anecdotally that we had heard from a number of families. So this is interesting for me to see that this past year, after we implemented that, I think the number you had in there was 11 students received perfect score or better, and all of them received invitations to their first choice.
Yes.
So that's interesting. I also note, though, that you put in here that there was a decline in applicants from tiers 7 to 8. Tiers 7 and 8, and it was a fairly substantial
46%, 62%.
No, decline in the number of applicants in that tier. It had the percent in here.
I thought it was 62, 46.
I think that was the amount that were
15 to 16%.
Oh,
yeah, right. I think that was the amount that were accepted or received invitation.
right. You're right.
But the percentage, oh no, so where am I seeing that?
Percentage invited.
There it is, yeah, on page
Slide 3. Yeah.
So the number of applicants in tiers 7 and 8 has declined by about 15 to 16%. Suspicion in my head is folks from previous years saying, my children shouldn't apply because they're not going to get in because they need the 100 plus the 10 points, that type of thing. So it will be interesting, folks, to understand that the change we made last year actually did result in everyone who had at least a perfect score got in. So it will be interesting to see if that data continues for previous years. Because one of the things you address on here is about our top performing students. Can the policy ensure that top performing students in the city receive an invitation to school of their choice? So be interesting to see if that plays out. I do appreciate the change from 8 to 4 because there is such confusion among parents about what tier they are in. We hear consistently about trying to understand how the tiers are made up, what the factors are, what the census data is. You have an exhaustive memo in here from Ms. Clarkson about how it is determined, but it's pretty thick reading, right?
Yep.
And so simplifying to me makes a difference. And this to me is simplifying. Chicago, a substantially bigger city than us who has wrestled with the same issue, has 4 tiers. So for us to go to 4 tiers, to me, makes sense. It's responding to parents and it's simplifying how to understand what tier you're in. The last point I'll make is, I think, quite frankly, the most important part of this presentation, and Dr. Alkins asked for one way to see the simulation. I'd also like to see it, what the results, did it, you have in here in the appendix, did it change invites and non-invites? It'd be interesting to see, did it change that by tiers? I think you have the aggregate data in there.
Yep.
But the last piece is this slide of potential areas for additional analysis. Because to me, these 4 points you raise are the points we hear from people across the city that have raised this consistently. Our colleague, Mr. Cardet Hernandez, has consistently raised about individual socioeconomic status versus by tier. And so I appreciate that that's in here, because I know that was important to him and he couldn't be with us tonight. But also this question, what are the impacts of size and tiers based on number of applicants in a tier versus the number of school-age children? I know that's something the original task force wrestled with and recommended one way. They had also wrestled with the issue of, do we do a certain amount of applicants citywide and then the rest by tier? That had been wrestled with by the task force, is done commonly in other cities that look at this. So I think each of these 4 questions, I appreciate, Superintendent, that these have been laid on the table for discussion. We're starting to get towards, we said we'd look at every 5 years. We don't want to be looking this at every single year. We're clearly seeing in the data, we're getting a wider range of students from across our district. We're getting more applicants from students who would traditionally maybe not have thought applying to our exam schools, and those are all positives. I think this proposal on the table simplifies, also recognizes some outstanding questions that we need to analyze further and dig deeper on. And so thank you for the presentation, and I look forward to conversation about it, further conversation about it.
So I think also going forward, there's kind of 3 pieces for me when I think of a policy. There's the policy itself, which was created. There's the implementation guide for that policy, which needed to be created for a policy that had not existed in this way. And then there's what are the supports for the students who are part of that policy. And so I think for us going forward, as we now kind of go into year 5, I do want to make sure that we're addressing kind of all 3 of those things. I think the exam schools have done a good job coming up with programming that they believe helps to support all students as they go to the exam schools. But I'd like to better codify that and actually make sure that's there. And that means looking at how are the students doing that are there. And I think, Dr. Hawkins, you poke at this a lot, right? Which is appropriate. Like, how it's getting in is one thing, but then what do we need to be doing to support success for students once they're in there? So I think going forward with our team, I want to make sure that all 3 of those things are happening with this particular policy, but all policies as we implement them, whether it's inclusion or whatever policies we're implementing.
No, Vice Chair O'Neill, your question makes me think of, have we actually done any surveying within the tiers to figure out perhaps what's behind the decline? Because even as you mentioned the stat, I was like, the reason why I think my head went to slide 6 was because if you look at the actual numbers, the applicants in tier 8 are the same. So it's really just tier 7 that we're talking about, right? So it's one tier that perhaps is receiving that particular message, right? So I'd be interested to see if we have done any surveying or have had any conversations with families as to why, because it's particularly, like definitely like over 60, a reduction in 60 applicants, right? So it's very interesting.
Yeah, 262 to.
Yeah, but yeah, 272 to 270, it's the
Right.
same. So,
My question is more about the 355 kids that did not get an invitation, and
Hmm.
what did they choose to do? How many of them chose to enroll in other schools, and also be interested in what percentage of those students were, current BPS students versus students coming back into the district from other areas as well?
Yes, so this past application cycle, of the applicants who were not invited to any exam school, 54% of them were enrolled in a BPS school in October. So about half.
So about half.
That was up, right?
Yes, that was higher than the year before, which was 43%.
So there's still about 150 kids that
That's right.
went elsewhere.
that went elsewhere, and I think about them as 150 high achieving kids
Yeah.
who BPS now does not have an opportunity to have as part of their.
Do we know, though, of those 150, whether they were in the BPS to start or whether they were taking the exam and sat outside of the BPS and then just remained outside of the BPS?
I don't have that in front of me, but
Sorry, I don't mean to ask you questions, Mark. We'll follow up. We'll follow up on that because I think it really is, it is the question of our students that are in the BPS that don't get a seat, staying in the BPS, leaving the BPS. Students from not in the BPS that don't get an exam school seat, are they choosing to remain outside of the BPS or come into the BPS? So I think if we can look at that, that would be helpful.
But I do remind us all that they may be quote unquote outside BPS, but they are City of Boston residents.
Yes.
Right.
100%.
Right. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, and I think, something else that we're not discussing tonight, but I think is equally as important is that, and we've heard it in the past from parents, that BPS does not do a good job of advertising what all of its high schools have to offer. So
Absolutely.
that, and some people who've not gotten into an exam school and have chosen another school have been pleasantly surprised at the academic rigor and the opportunities that other high schools offer. So, we need to do a better job of making sure all of our schools are well represented, as well as parents are getting the information early enough about what schools offer and how to access them, because they often feel they get a lot of information about applying for exam schools, which means we do our own selves a disservice, as that's the only
That's right.
messages they're getting, that there are not other, quality opportunities. as
That's right.
well.
And to that recommendation, Chair, I think we had a strong presence of the high schools at the showcase and a lot of parents for high school grades, both sixth grade transitioning to seventh and then ninth grade. The other is a lot of our high schools are doing open houses on their own to be able to sort of within their regions promote. So I think, this is something I know with communications and the new website, this is something that we'll be particularly kind of honing in on, is how are we, marketing is the wrong word, presenting the best of our schools.
Thank you for this continuous work that you've been doing, and we look forward to taking action on this when we come back together in January.
Great.
All righty. Okay. So we will now return to public comment. No? Okay, well, thank you all. That concludes our business for this evening. Before I say that, is there any new business? No. Okay, thank you. Then that concludes our business for the evening. The school committee will hold virtual meetings on Zoom from January through March, starting at 5 p.m. Committee's annual organization meeting will take place on Wednesday, January 6th at 5 p.m. And our next regular meeting will take place on Wednesday, January 15th at 5 p.m. Again, those meetings will be held virtually. The complete 2025 meeting schedule will be posted on the committee's webpage after it's formally approved at our organizational meeting. And with that, I have a motion to end the meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Is there any objection to approving the motion by unanimous consent? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all and have a wonderful holiday and see you in the new year.
Happy
Thank you,
holiday.
Madam Chair.